They told you the mind was fixed, that the way you think, feel, and react is just who you are. They told you change was slow, painful, maybe even impossible. But if that were true, how do some people face chaos with peace? How do some walk through fire and never burn? Here's the truth no one taught you. The mind is not a prison. It's a tool. And Buddhism holds the manual. For thousands of years, monks, mystics, and masters have used simple truths to break mental chains, without therapy, without pills, without running from their past. They learned how to rewire fear into peace, craving into clarity, and pain into power. And now, so will you. Tonight, as you listen, your mind will start to soften. The tight grip of stress will loosen. Thoughts that used to shout will begin to whisper. The noise will settle, and beneath it, something rare will start to rise. Silence, stillness, and strength. This isn't just audio to fall asleep to. This is a reset button for the mind. The programming begins now. Are you ready? Let's begin. So now that you know, this isn't just background noise. This is deep work, quiet work, the kind that doesn't need effort or struggle, just trust, just presence. Because tonight, you're not just closing your eyes, you're opening a door. And on the other side of that door is the place where old patterns begin to dissolve. There's something ancient inside every mind, a pull, a pattern, a rhythm that feels familiar even when it doesn't make sense. You don't remember where it came from, but it's there. A fear you can't explain, a craving that won't leave, a reaction that shows up before thought. And it happens over and over again, not because of who you are, but because of what's been left behind. This is samsara. In Buddhist and Hindu teachings, samskaras are mental impressions left by past actions, not just from this life, but from all the lives that came before. They're grooves in the mind, like fingerprints on glass or footprints in wet sand. Even if you don't see who made them, they shape the path you walk. They decide where the mind flows when it's tired, stressed, or asleep. They're like echo loops, replaying without permission. And tonight, you're going to begin letting them go, without needing to know where they came from, without needing to fix anything, just through awareness, stillness, and the deep, slow reset of subconscious reconditioning. Samskaras aren't memories you can see. They're patterns you feel. They show up in the way certain voices trigger you, in the way a smell brings sadness, in the panic that makes no sense. They're why some people fear abandonment before they're ever left, why others chase approval without knowing why. Samskaras don't come with labels. They're energy, carried forward like wind carries scent, unseen, but heavy. And the problem isn't that they exist. The problem is we mistake them for truth. We think they are us, but they're not. They're echoes, and echoes can fade. Right now, the breath you're taking, that's the beginning. Because the breath doesn't carry samskara. The breath doesn't judge, it only flows. It reminds the body of what's real. And that's exactly what meditation does. Not to escape samskaras, but to watch them, to meet them, and to soften their grip without needing to fight them. You don't need to remember the moment a samskara was formed. You don't need a backstory. Buddhism teaches that it doesn't matter if a scar is from yesterday or 1,000 lives ago. The healing happens now. And healing doesn't ask for memory. It asks for presence. So how do these imprints work? Every action, every word, every thought leaves behind a trace. Think of it like a ripple. When an intense emotional moment happens, grief, love, fear, rage, it stirs the mind's surface so deeply that the vibration stays even after the event has passed. That vibration becomes a samskara. And that samskara becomes a habit, not just of action, but of perception. You begin to see the world through that lens. Not because the world is that way, but because your inner imprint is coloring everything. This is why two people can experience the same event and walk away with totally different feelings. One sees betrayal, the other sees growth. One feels fear, the other feels freedom. It's not the event, it's the filter, and filters are built from samskara. The most powerful part of this: the mind doesn't need to know the source to change the filter. Modern psychology often searches for the origin of pain, digging through the past for the first wound. Buddhism skips that. It says, pain arises, let it rise, watch it, and don't add more to it. When you sit with silence, when you breathe without trying to fix, something beautiful happens. The pattern surfaces. You feel it, maybe in the chest, maybe behind the eyes, maybe like a sudden thought that flashes without warning. But you don't chase it, you don't believe it, you just let it be. And in that stillness, the samskara weakens. Every time you don't feed it with reaction, it fades a little more. This is the power of passive reprogramming. No drama, no resistance, just repetition of peace, and repetition rewrites code. Think of the mind like a field. Samskaras are like grooves worn into the earth from years of the same wheel passing through. At first, the wheel goes down easily. It doesn't even need steering. The rut is already there. But meditation is like rain, soft, steady, and over time it begins to fill the groove. The wheel doesn't stick as much. Eventually, it starts creating new paths, ones chosen with awareness, not habit. What's incredible is that even during sleep, the mind is working. This is why sleep meditation is so powerful. It's not just passive listening, it's subconscious renewal. Your brain waves slow down. The default mode network, the part that constantly replays past and future, begins to quiet. And in that space, samskaras rise gently and dissolve just as gently. You might notice dreams shift, emotions shift, reactions during the day feel less automatic. And that's how you know it's working. Not because you tried harder, but because you stopped feeding the loop. There's a reason why Buddhist monks spend hours each day in stillness. It's not to escape the world. It's to stop reacting long enough for the world inside to rewire itself. Samskaras are fed by reaction. Starve them, and they starve. But here's something deeper. Not all samskaras are negative. Some are beautiful. Compassion, patience, equanimity. They too are imprints. The mind is always forming them. So when you practice metta, loving kindness, when you hold compassion even when no one sees it, when you pause before reacting, that forms new grooves. And guess what? These are stronger than the old ones. Why? Because they're conscious, chosen, rooted in awareness. There's a line in the ancient texts that says, "What you frequently think and ponder upon becomes the inclination of your mind." That's not a metaphor. That's neuroscience before science had a name for it. Modern studies show that repeated thoughts carve neurological pathways. The mind literally reshapes itself based on what it pays attention to. So now, as you lie here, with each word, your attention is shifting. And that shift is the beginning of a different future. Not because you're forcing anything, but because you're allowing something new to settle in. Just like water finding a new path when the old one is blocked. Letting go of samsara doesn't mean becoming blank. It means choosing what gets to stay. It means not being ruled by echoes. It means being free enough to feel without fear, to think without being dragged backward. And here's the part no one tells you. This happens in layers. One pattern might dissolve tonight, another might rise next week. But each time you show up with awareness, each time you don't feed the storm loses strength. You're not erasing the past. You're just choosing not to be driven by it. This is the silent wisdom of Buddhism, not in loud transformation, but in the quiet dismantling of what no longer serves. Samskaras taught the mind to survive. Now you're teaching it to be free. And freedom feels like silence. Like peace, where there used to be tension. Like a breath that goes all the way down without resistance. Like a mind that doesn't bite its own tail anymore. So tonight, as this plays, there's nothing for you to do. Nothing to fix. Nothing to dig up. Just rest. Let the stillness speak louder than the patterns. Let awareness rewrite the code. Let the echoes fade into the distance where they belong, because the past may have shaped you, but it doesn't own you. And now we continue. And as the weight of old imprints begins to lift, those deep grooves of thought that were never really yours, something strange and liberating starts to happen. The silence you've created begins to reveal a truth that's even deeper than the patterns themselves. A truth hidden in plain sight, one that turns the whole system upside down. Because now we're peeling back the biggest illusion of all, the one called I. There's a quiet thought that sits at the root of almost every emotion, every belief, every mental loop. This is happening to me. That one idea, hidden behind every reaction, every plan, every memory. But what if it's not true? What if the me that's reacting is just a story? This is where the concept of emptiness begins. Not emptiness like sadness or loneliness, but emptiness like openness, like potential, like a mirror that reflects everything but holds on to nothing. Emptiness in Buddhist thought isn't something missing. It's something free. Free of fixed identity, free of labels, free of the need to defend or prove or explain. The idea of a solid self is comforting, but it's also the source of most suffering, because when the mind says, I was hurt, I need to be right, I can't lose, it locks itself into a role, and roles are prisons, even the good ones. Thought loops, those repetitive, sticky narratives that circle endlessly, are almost always powered by identity. Not just any identity, but personal identity. The idea that I am this or I must be seen this way. When someone criticizes, it hurts because the mind says, "That's an attack on me." When failure happens, it becomes, "I'm not good enough." Even success can trap because the ego says, "This must continue or I disappear." This is why breaking thought loops isn't just about changing thoughts. It's about dissolving the I that clings to them. Here's how that works. Buddhism teaches that identity is not a thing, it's a process. A mental construction built moment by moment through perception, memory, comparison, and habit. Like a house built out of fog, it only looks solid if you don't examine it too closely. But the second you pause and observe it directly, it starts to melt. What feels like me is usually just a bundle of sensations, reactions, and old stories stuck together. But when the mind watches those thoughts rise without grabbing them, it sees the gaps. It sees that no thought lasts, no feeling stays, no self remains. This realization is not philosophical. It's liberating, because if I am not fixed, then neither is the pain, neither is the shame, neither is the fear. This is where suffering begins to break apart, not by force, but by insight. When the mind clings to a solid I, everything feels personal. But when it sees that I is just a habit of mind, emotions stop sticking, thoughts pass through without looping, conflict softens, the drama ends. Let's go deeper. The self wants to exist, it wants to be important, it wants to survive. So it creates conflict. It feeds on problems. Even when everything's fine, the ego will find something to worry about, because without a problem, there's nothing to solve and nothing to protect. Think about how many times anxiety shows up, not because something's wrong, but because the mind doesn't know who it is without worry. Think about how often doubt arises right after clarity, just to keep the self busy. This is identity maintenance disguised as thought. When the ego isn't getting fed, when no one's praising or blaming or validating, it starts panicking. Am I invisible? It asks. But underneath that question is the real fear. If no one sees me, do I even exist? This is the power of emptiness. It answers that question with freedom, because yes, the self as a concept is empty, but awareness itself is not. Awareness doesn't need identity. It doesn't need a name, a story, or a purpose. It just is, and it sees without clinging. When this shift begins, even gently, the whole structure of thought changes. Reactions lose fuel, emotional triggers lose weight. The part of the mind that was always defending something relaxes, because there's nothing left to protect. You've probably noticed how some thoughts seem to come with a physical grip. Tight chest, shallow breath, stomach tension. That's the ego holding on. That's the I saying, "This matters, this defines me." But when you bring awareness to that grip, without trying to change it, it begins to soften, not because you figured it out, but because the self that was clenching begins to dissolve. This is not something you believe in theory, it's something you feel in real time, a lightness, a quiet, a distance from your own voice. And the beauty is, it can happen while you sleep, because the subconscious doesn't need words. It learns through repetition, through space, through silence. As this message sinks in, the mind begins to rewire, not by force, but by exposure. Over and over, the idea that I am not this thought settles deeper, until it becomes natural. Thoughts still come, but they don't hook you. You hear them, you feel them, and then they pass. This is what the Buddhists call right view. Not right as in morally correct, right as in aligned with reality. Seeing that identity is a tool, not a truth. Seeing that suffering comes not from what happens, but from the idea that it's happening to me. And when that view takes root, even the hardest moments lose their sting. Criticism becomes sound, failure becomes data, praise becomes wind. Nothing needs to stick because there's no self to hold it. That doesn't mean you become passive or detached. In fact, it's the opposite. You become fully alive, fully here. But without the weight of needing to protect an identity, you respond, you act, you feel. But it's clean, no residue, no clinging. Think of it like this. Most people live like a sticky web. Every thought, every comment, every memory gets caught. The web grows tangled, heavy, and eventually it collapses under its own weight. But when the self is seen as empty, the web dissolves. There's just air. Things pass through. The mind breathes again. This is how emptiness becomes the ultimate mental freedom. Not emptiness as a void, but as clarity. A clarity that doesn't need to control or grasp. It just sees. And in that seeing, everything begins to loosen. Even the way we talk to ourselves changes. That internal voice, the one that says, I can't do this, I'm not enough, I always mess up. It starts to sound silly. Because who is it talking to? If there's no fixed self, then who's failing? Who's not enough? The entire game collapses, and in its place, a quiet confidence rises, one that doesn't need a name. When the identity dissolves, there's no one to impress, no one to fear, no one to prove. And the irony? That's when you become your most powerful self, because you're no longer acting from fear or ego. You're acting from presence. You show up clean, clear, free. And yes, this takes time. It's not a switch, it's a slow melting. But the more the mind hears this, especially in a relaxed state like sleep, the deeper the insight goes. It sinks beneath the conscious mind. It reaches the roots, and those roots begin to loosen. That's how reprogramming happens, not with effort, with surrender, not by building a better me, but by seeing through the illusion of me. There's a teaching that says, when the self disappears, the world becomes light. And that's what's happening here. Each word, each breath, gently dissolving the layers of self that were never really solid to begin with. You're not erasing anything. You're just stepping out of the costume. And what's left? Awareness, peace, spaciousness. A mind that thinks without fear. A heart that feels without defense. A being that simply is. So let it happen. Don't chase it. Don't grasp. Just rest in the knowing that every second of stillness is shifting something deep. Right now, the I that clings is fading. The identity that reacts is softening, and a deeper awareness is rising. One that doesn't need a story. Because what you truly are has never been a thought. It's always been the space beneath them. And once the mind begins to loosen its grip on identity, something unexpected happens. What once felt automatic starts to feel optional. That tension that used to rise so quickly doesn't have the same fuel. The loop that used to pull you under now flickers and passes. not because the world changed, but because the illusion of a fixed self isn't anchoring the reaction anymore. And that's when something deeper begins to reveal itself. The machinery behind thought. The hidden chain that links one mental event to another, not randomly, but precisely. This is the heart of Buddhist insight, the code behind the chaos. And tonight, we go straight into it. In the stillness you're creating now, the mind is finally quiet enough to witness its own workings. This is where the doctrine of dependent origination becomes more than philosophy. It becomes a mirror, a map, a flashlight in the dark. Because once you know how a thought forms, you don't have to be controlled by it. You can pause the loop, unplug the anxiety, disarm the craving, not by pushing it away, but by understanding how it got there. Dependent origination, also called paticca samuppada, teaches that nothing arises on its own. Every mental state, every emotion, every craving, every fear comes from something before it. And that came from something before that. Like links in a chain, each one connected, each one dependent on the last. This is not a spiritual metaphor. This is a psychological engine, and it runs all day, every day, without being seen. But not anymore. In this teaching, the Buddha outlines 12 links, 12 steps that show how suffering is born. Not in some abstract way, in a step-by-step breakdown of how the mind turns a moment into a prison, and how that prison can be walked out of if the process is understood. It begins with ignorance, not stupidity, not lack of education, but not seeing clearly, not knowing the true nature of things. Ignorance here means not realizing that everything is changing, that nothing is solid, and that clinging creates pain. It's the foundation of every mental distortion. It's like looking through dirty glass and thinking the world is blurry, not realizing the lens is the problem. From that, mental formations arise, habits of thought, impulses. These are the pre-programmed responses built from all past conditioning. They shape how we react before we even notice we're reacting. They set the tone. They nudge the mind toward craving or resistance automatically. Then comes consciousness. Not awareness, but the moment-to-moment knowing of experience. It's the light that shines on sensation, but shaped by what came before. If the light is colored by those old formations, even neutral events start to feel threatening. A look, a silence, a delay, it all gets interpreted through that lens. From consciousness, name and form arise. That's mind and body, the mental labels and the physical sensations. They work together, building the world we perceive. A tight chest becomes anxiety. A sensation in the stomach becomes danger. These labels come fast and they feel real, but they're built on earlier links. Change the input and the labels shift. Then the 6 sense bases activate. Eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind. Yes, mind is a sense base in Buddhism. It's the organ that senses thoughts, just like the eyes sense light. When any of these sense doors open, the next link begins. Contact happens when sense base meets object. Eyes meet sight. Ears meet sound. Mind meets thought. And when contact happens, feeling arises. Not emotional feeling, but sensation. pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. This part is automatic, but it's also crucial because feeling is the fork in the road. If the feeling is pleasant, craving begins, a desire to keep it. If it's unpleasant, aversion rises, a push to get rid of it. And if it's neutral, ignorance often continues because we don't notice it at all. This is where suffering starts to take shape, not from the sensation, but from the grasping, from wanting more or less or different. That craving becomes clinging, a deeper attachment. No longer just, I want this, but I need this to be happy. Or worse, if I don't get this, I am not okay. From clinging, becoming arises a sense of identity, the idea that this is who I am now, whether it's the role we play, the emotion we feel, or the belief we hold. It becomes solid. It defines the moment. And then comes birth. Not physical birth, but the birth of the full mental state, the story, the reaction, the action that flows from all the previous links. Once birth happens, the result is inevitable. Old age and death follow, not literal aging, but decay, endings, loss. The suffering that comes from anything conditioned eventually breaking apart. And with that comes grief, despair, sorrow, what the Buddha called dukkha. But here's the power in all of this. At any point in that chain, awareness can interrupt the link. The process is not fate. It's not fixed. It's just habit. And habit can be rewired. Let's break it down. When ignorance is seen as ignorance, clarity begins. Just recognizing this thought is based on an assumption starts the unraveling. When you see that a reaction is just a mental formation, not a truth, it weakens. When you catch yourself labeling a body sensation with fear, you can pause and just feel it. No name, no story, just sensation. At the level of feeling, one of the most powerful practices arises. Mindfulness of pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. Just noticing this feels good, this feels bad, this feels meh, without clinging or pushing, completely changes the momentum of the chain. Craving doesn't need to follow. You can feel something pleasant and not reach for it. You can feel something unpleasant and not resist it. And if craving is already there, it can be seen too, not indulged, not denied, just watched. Craving wants urgency, but mindfulness slows it down. Clinging only holds power when it's unconscious. When brought into awareness, its grip softens. You don't have to suppress it. You just don't obey it. That's how the cycle weakens, one link at a time. Now consider this. Every time you notice a thought and choose not to react, you're breaking the chain. Every time you feel discomfort and choose to stay with compassion, you're breaking the chain. Every time you choose awareness over identity, clarity over reaction, stillness over impulse, you're rewiring the whole system. And when this starts to happen during sleep-based reprogramming, it becomes even more powerful. Because the mind is not arguing, it's absorbing. These insights begin to sink beneath the surface. The subconscious starts to recognize patterns before they fully form. The pause becomes natural. The loop slows down before it begins. You might start noticing that you don't react the way you used to. That anxiety comes but leaves faster. That craving arises but doesn't control you. That conflict starts, but you don't get pulled in. That's not luck. That's the chain breaking. That's years of mental habit loosening, one soft breath at a time. And you didn't force it, you just saw it, over and over. This is why dependent origination is not just a teaching. It's a tool, a real-time decoder of the mind. It shows you how everything arises and how nothing has to continue, and it gets even deeper. Because this chain doesn't just explain suffering, it explains identity, behavior, emotional addiction, trauma cycles. It shows how a single trigger, like a word or a glance, can ripple through all 12 links in seconds and create a full-blown spiral. But with awareness, those 12 links can turn into 12 gates, each one a chance to return to presence. This is how deep the mind can go, and how simple the freedom is. It's not about removing pain. It's about removing the illusion that pain must lead to suffering. It's not about controlling thoughts. It's about seeing them clearly enough that they don't control you. Each night you listen, this understanding goes deeper. The mind learns not just intellectually, but viscerally. It rewires, not because it's told to, but because it's finally seeing how it's been fooling itself all along. There's no need to memorize the links. Just remember this. Suffering builds when the mind reacts. Freedom builds when the mind sees. You don't have to stop the chain at the first link. Stop it at the 5th, or the 7th, or the 11th. Any point is an entry point. Every moment is a door. And when enough of those doors are opened, a new path forms. One that doesn't lead to sorrow. One that doesn't end in reaction. One that loops not into craving and identity, but into clarity, peace, and rest. That's what's happening now. You're not just falling asleep, you're rising above the loop. And now that the chain has been revealed, that link between one moment and the next, that silent engine behind every craving, every reaction, every constructed identity, something subtle starts to shift. There's a widening of space between stimulus and response, a pause that wasn't there before, a deeper awareness of where thoughts begin and how easily they snowball when not seen clearly. But as clarity grows, so does a new kind of burden, the question of consequence, the weight of cause and effect, the quiet voice that wonders, did I bring this on myself? And tonight, that weight begins to lift. Because the next layer of mental reprogramming isn't just about understanding the process. It's about untying the knot of guilt that forms when karma is misunderstood. A knot that tightens with every mistake, every failure, every painful outcome. But Buddhism offers a different way of seeing it. Not through punishment, not through shame, but through precision. Through understanding the difference between karma and vipaka, action and result. The word karma gets thrown around a lot, often stripped of its depth. In popular culture, it's used like a cosmic scoreboard. Do good, get good. Do bad, get bad. But that's not how the Buddha taught it. Karma isn't about judgment. It's about momentum. It's not a cosmic punishment system. It's a natural law of cause and effect, operating at the level of mind. Karma is simply action, intentional action. Not what happens, but what you initiate. Every thought, word, or deed that arises from intention is karma. That's it. It's the seed. What grows from it is vipaka, the result. the fruit. But here's where it gets complicated. The result isn't always immediate. It's not always obvious. And it's not always personal. Pain doesn't always mean bad karma. Success doesn't always mean good karma. The universe isn't rewarding or punishing. It's unfolding, constantly. And sometimes the result of an action from long ago, this life or another, ripens in ways that make no logical sense to the conscious mind. Understanding this brings freedom, because it allows you to stop asking, "Why me?" and start seeing pain as part of a much bigger process. One that includes but doesn't revolve around you. Let's take this deeper. Vipaka is not delivered like a bill. It's not a score being settled. It's the natural outcome of conditions coming together. Just like planting a seed doesn't mean instant fruit. Soil, water, sunlight, all play a role. And even then, weather and time affect how and when it ripens. Some karma ripens quickly, some takes years. Some may not ripen at all in this life. Others may not even be yours. Yes, because the field we live in isn't isolated. It's shared. Collective karma exists. Group patterns, cultural trauma, inherited tendencies passed down not just biologically, but emotionally, psychologically. Sometimes what feels like your fault is actually the residue of systems much larger than the individual. This is why Vipaka cannot be taken personally, because what arises now is the result of countless conditions, not a divine verdict. You don't suffer because you deserve to. You suffer because conditions have aligned in a certain way, and those conditions can shift. This perspective creates a different kind of healing, one not rooted in guilt or blame, but in clarity. When pain is seen as result, not identity, you stop using it as proof of your worth. You stop interpreting every struggle as a sign that something is wrong with you, and more than that, you stop fearing karma. Because when understood correctly, karma is empowering. It says, your choices matter, not because they control outcomes, but because they shape your inner world. Karma is not about what happens to you. It's about how you move through what happens. Let's break it down further. When the mind believes pain is a punishment, it creates resistance. It clenches, it questions, it spirals. But when pain is seen as a vipaka, an unfolding of conditions, something softens. You still feel it, but it no longer defines you. It no longer becomes your identity. And when you start seeing the difference between karma and vipaka in real time, the way you move through life changes. You make a mistake. Instead of spiraling into guilt, you reflect. You see the intention behind the action. You adjust. That's karma. You experience consequences. You feel the sting. But instead of self-punishment, you respond with care. That's wise engagement with vipaka. This is not about moral perfection. It's about sensitivity, awareness, discernment. Seeing that what you sow may not grow immediately, but the soil remembers. And here's the part that really frees the mind. Understanding that some vipaka has nothing to do with your present karma. This removes the false pressure to control outcomes. It allows compassion to rise in the face of confusion. Sometimes life hurts because life is complex, not because you did something wrong. And this is where deep forgiveness starts. Not just for others, but for yourself. Because when you realize that results are just that, results, You stop beating yourself up over the uncontrollable. You stop tying your worth to success. You stop thinking you could have done more if only you'd been better. You begin to trust something wiser than logic. The slow unfolding of mind and matter, the subtle shift that happens when you meet life with awareness instead of judgment. Let's bring this into the subconscious. When this understanding begins to settle, not just in the intellect, but in the emotional core, it rewires how the nervous system responds to challenge. The guilt reflex weakens. The shame impulse loosens. That quiet voice that whispers, "This is your fault," begins to fade. Because the mind now knows, fault isn't the point. Response is. Even in dreams, even in deep rest, this shift can be felt. A dream of failure might no longer leave a residue of self-hatred. A memory might arise, but pass without the same sting. Not because the memory changed, but because the lens did. And that lens is what karma shapes most. You may not control what happens, but you can always influence how you see. That's where karma is most powerful, not in changing the outer world, but in transforming the inner response. The more this teaching is heard, the deeper it goes. It starts to replace old scripts. Scripts that say, "You're being punished. This is what you deserve. You always mess up." Those scripts dissolve when met with truth. Because the truth is far more compassionate than the ego ever was. And the truth is this: you're not here to be punished. You're here to awaken. Every moment, every emotion, every ripple of experience is part of that awakening. Some karma ripens sweet, some ripens bitter. But all of it can be used for clarity. All of it can be met with grace. Even when the mind forgets, the practice remembers. Even when fear returns, the path is still beneath your feet. Vipaka may be the fruit, but how you carry it, how you move through it, that's the practice. That's the freedom. That's the real karma being created in every breath. So now, as your body rests and the mind opens, let this truth settle in. Nothing that's happening to you is final. Nothing defines you. Pain is a visitor. Guilt is a shadow. And the only thing that matters now is presence. Presence sharpens karma. Awareness softens vipaka. And the more you stay with both, the lighter the path becomes. This is the shift, from blame to understanding, from resistance to acceptance, from guilt to wisdom. And now that the burden of guilt has begun to lift, that old misunderstanding of karma as punishment replaced by the clarity of cause and unfolding, a deeper softness begins to enter. A space opens inside the mind, no longer defending, no longer blaming, just ready. Ready to feel without fear. Ready to experience life not as something to survive, but something to meet with dignity. That readiness is where the next layer begins. Because once the mind is no longer spinning in shame, it becomes teachable. And what it can learn, even in sleep, are states of being that heal everything they touch. States that don't depend on outcome, identity, or control. Just presence, just feeling, and those states are the Brahmaviharas. They're called the sublime attitudes, not because they're difficult or unreachable, but because they elevate the heart. 4 states of mind so pure, so clean, that when practiced regularly, They reshape everything: how thought forms, how the body reacts, how the world is perceived. They're not moods, they're not emotions, they're dispositions of consciousness. And when introduced during sleep, when resistance is low and receptivity is high, they begin to etch new grooves into the emotional core. The first is loving kindness, a deliberate choice to wish well, not based on feeling, but on intention. It is not liking, it is not sentiment. It is the quiet, powerful wish: may you be well, may I be well, may all beings be well. This simple phrase, repeated softly in the background of the mind, becomes a kind of emotional DNA. It bypasses judgment, it overrides separation. And the more often it's felt, even faintly, the more it becomes a new emotional default. When practiced during waking life, loving kindness rewires how we view ourselves and others. But when repeated during sleep, it goes even deeper. It changes how the subconscious relates to memory, to the face of a stranger, to the old voice of self-criticism. Because the mind, once steeped in fear, begins to adopt a baseline of goodwill. And goodwill, when internalized, breaks cycles of attack and defense before they even start. The second state is compassion, not pity, not sadness, but the willingness to feel another's pain and still wish them peace. It's the heart's response to suffering, and it includes the self. Self-compassion is not indulgence, it is medicine. When practiced deeply, it dissolves the sharp edge of perfectionism. It neutralizes the reflex to punish, and it allows healing to unfold, not by force, but by warmth. What makes compassion so powerful is that it doesn't wait for conditions to be right. It doesn't require understanding, apology, or resolution. It just moves toward pain with gentleness. When this state is invited into sleep, the effect is astonishing. The subconscious begins to interpret difficult memories through a softer lens. Forgiveness becomes less effort, more release. Dreams become less conflict, more repair. Compassion doesn't erase boundaries, it just keeps them clean. It allows you to say no without anger, to walk away without hate, to remember pain without carrying it like a shield. In the language of the mind, compassion speaks softly, but rewrites loudly. The third state is empathetic joy, a rare and radical thing. It is the happiness felt for another's success, beauty, or growth, not as comparison, but as celebration. It is the opposite of envy. It is what clears the heart of scarcity, and it's one of the hardest attitudes to access in daily life because it requires trust. Trust that someone else's gain is not your loss. Trust that goodness is not a limited resource. But when this state begins to arise, even in small moments, it signals a massive shift in the emotional landscape. The competitive mind loosens, the inner critic weakens, and the capacity to feel joy increases. Not because life got easier, but because the heart became more open. Practicing empathetic joy in sleep is one of the most effective subconscious rewiring tools. Why? Because during rest, the ego's comparison software is paused. The mind is less guarded, more absorbent. When positive affirmations around shared joy are introduced gently, I rejoice in the happiness of others. May all beings know success and peace. They begin to replace the deep scripts of inadequacy. This rewiring is not intellectual, it's emotional. The nervous system begins to relax around other people's wins. The smile comes faster. The sense of threat, of lack, begins to fade. And what remains is spaciousness, the kind of emotional maturity that doesn't just endure life, it celebrates it. The fourth and final sublime state is equanimity. Balance, not indifference, not detachment, but the ability to remain steady through change. Equanimity is the quiet strength that doesn't resist the wave, but knows how to float through it. It's not cold, it's clear, it's not withdrawn, it's wise. Equanimity teaches the mind that not every impulse needs reaction, that not every storm requires shelter, that peace is not found in avoiding life, but in standing still while life moves around you. This state is the anchor. And when introduced during sleep, especially after the mind has already softened through the previous three states, it begins to lay the foundation for long-term inner stability. Emotional reactivity decreases. The peaks and valleys of mood become more navigable. The mind, once easily thrown off balance by praise or blame, begins to stay centered. What makes equanimity so powerful is its neutrality. It doesn't push or pull, it allows, and in allowing, it frees. Each of these states works together. Loving kindness opens the heart. Compassion gives it depth. Empathetic joy gives it expansion. Equanimity gives it strength. When all four are practiced, even passively, even during sleep, they begin to form a new emotional compass. One that doesn't swing wildly with circumstances, one that doesn't collapse under criticism or inflate with praise. They don't need to be felt intensely to be effective. They just need to be invited. The subconscious mind is always listening. When these attitudes are repeated through nightly affirmations, they begin to replace the old scripts. Scripts like, I'm not good enough, they're better than me, I can't forgive, I always mess up. Those thoughts lose strength when the inner dialogue becomes, may I be kind. May I meet this pain with compassion. May I celebrate their joy. May I rest in balance. This is not emotional fluff. This is deep psychological training. And the most effective time to plant these seeds is when the mind is soft and the gates of the subconscious are open during sleep. There's a reason Buddhist monks spend years developing these attitudes, not because they're nice, but because they're transformative. They rewire not just behavior, but perception. They change how the world looks, feels, and responds. And when repeated in the silence of night, they begin to take root at the level where real change happens. Over time, something starts to shift. Not in how much pain you have, but in how you carry it. Not in how perfect life is, but in how little it controls you. You become less reactive, less guarded, more resilient, more open. You don't need to convince yourself of peace. It starts to feel like home. This is the hidden gift of the Brahmaviharas. They don't ask for perfection. They don't require belief. They just ask for presence, and presence, repeated, becomes programming. So now, as your body softens further and the breath continues its slow rhythm, let these states begin to settle into the layers beneath thought. May loving kindness gently wash over any harshness still held. May compassion touch the places still aching. May joy find a home even in quiet moments. May balance anchor the parts of you still learning to let go. Because no matter what today brought, no matter what thoughts tried to take hold, tonight you're planting something deeper, something the world can't shake, something that grows in silence and blooms without effort. And as those four sublime states begin to settle into your system, softening the edges of thought, deepening emotional balance, dissolving comparison, and rooting you in calm goodwill, there's something else that begins to reveal itself beneath the surface. It's subtle, but powerful. It's the quiet realization that all these mental states, all this reconditioning, all this progress, is happening without a solid you controlling it. The transformation is real. But the one who claims it, less and less necessary, because now we're entering the deepest territory of all. Not what the mind is thinking, not how it feels, but who it thinks is thinking and feeling at all. There's a voice that follows most people their entire lives. It judges, it doubts, it compares, it criticizes. Sometimes it whispers, sometimes it shouts, but it's almost always there, giving commentary on everything, especially on you. That voice says things like, "You always mess this up. You're not enough. They don't like you. You should be doing more. You're falling behind." It feels like truth, but it's just noise. And more importantly, it's not you. That's the heart of this teaching, the insight known as anatta, non-self. This isn't just a rejection of ego, it's the radical realization that the self the voice is talking to and the self the voice pretends to be is a mental fabrication. There is no solid, permanent I behind the thoughts, no fixed person being judged, no core identity being threatened, just process, just flow, just mental events coming and going. And when that's seen clearly, not just understood, but felt, everything changes, especially that inner dialogue. The voice loses power because there's no one left to believe it. It's not about silencing the voice. That's not necessary, and it's not possible. What's possible is seeing it for what it is: empty sound, thought with no thinker, words arising in a system that doesn't need a narrator, and this becomes most accessible when the mind is quiet, when the defenses are down, when the need to hold on to identity begins to fade. That's why this teaching is so effective during sleep, because the conscious mind, the one that usually insists on being me, begins to dissolve. And what's left is awareness without attachment. The thought, "I'm not good enough," might still appear, but there's no one there to grip it, no one saying, "That's about me." It's just sound, just passing, like hearing a stranger speak in the distance. You recognize the words, but you don't respond. This is how non-self neutralizes negative inner dialogue. Not through counter-argument, not through willpower, but through disidentification. The insight that this voice isn't coming from a real self, it's arising from conditioned habit, from echoes, from brain patterns, not from identity. Every moment that insight deepens, the voice gets weaker, not quieter, weaker. It loses influence. It may still appear, but it doesn't land. The body doesn't flinch. The heart doesn't clench. The breath stays steady. Non-self is not emptiness in a hollow way. It's freedom. It's not nihilism. It's clarity. It means there's nothing to protect, nothing to prove, nothing to defend. And that's what disarms the voice that feeds on defense. Most people live in reaction to this voice their entire lives. They build careers to prove it wrong. They chase relationships to feel validated. They avoid risk to prevent it from saying, "I told you so." But once you see the voice as just thought and the self it talks to as just a shadow, all of that effort begins to fall away. What's left is stillness. Stillness doesn't argue with the voice, it outlasts it. And the more the voice speaks into stillness, the more ridiculous it begins to sound. "You're a failure," it says. But there's no one failing, just effort, just motion, just learning. "You should be ashamed," it says. But there's no fixed person who owns the past. Just memory, just conditioning, just causes and effects playing out in awareness. This is what non-self reveals, that the voice is speaking into a void, and when there's no one to listen, it fades. It's important to understand that this isn't about becoming numb. It's not about detaching from life or shutting down feeling. In fact, it's the opposite. Without the story of self, emotions become cleaner. Grief is just grief, not my grief. Anger is just anger, not a threat to identity. Joy is just joy, not proof of success. Emotions are felt more deeply, but clung to less. They move through, without sticking. This is the subtle transformation that happens when the mind begins to live without I. And it's not dramatic. It's not loud. It's gradual, but steady, like fog lifting, like ice melting, one mental contraction at a time. And each night, this insight is repeated. Each time the words sink into the subconscious, the illusion of self loses just a little more strength. The brain begins to unpair the voice from the identity. It begins to treat thoughts like weather, temporary, shifting, and impersonal. So when you hear the thought, "You're not doing enough," it might still come. But now it's followed by space. And in that space is the awareness that this is just old conditioning playing out. No one needs to answer. No one needs to obey. And just like that, the loop breaks. The ego thrives on urgency, on making everything personal, on turning every thought into a threat. But the teaching of non-self gives you an exit, not from life, but from the illusion of being trapped inside it. You begin to operate from clarity, not protection. From peace, not performance. From presence, not narrative. And this transformation isn't limited to sleep. It leaks into the day. You speak less defensively. You move through conflict with less friction. You make decisions with less second-guessing. Not because you became more confident, but because there's no self to protect. Just awareness choosing, adjusting, flowing. Even the body begins to respond. Tension patterns shift. The shoulders drop. The jaw relaxes. Breathing deepens. Because when there's no me at the center of the storm, the system doesn't need to brace for impact. This is the heart of true reprogramming. Not just changing what you think, but loosening who you think you are, and letting that space fill with something truer, something softer, something that doesn't argue with pain, but holds it with wisdom. Because once you see that the self is not a solid thing, but a flickering process, you stop trying to fix it, and you start living from the place beneath it, the place that watches, that listens, that knows, even now, that peace isn't found in changing the voice. It's found in stepping outside of its reach. So tonight, let the voice say what it wants. Let the thoughts rise and fall. Let the mind do what it does. But know, deeply, that you are not what it says. You are not the story it tells. You are not the self it defends. You are the silence behind it. And now we continue. And as the illusion of self dissolves quietly into the background, no longer driving the narrative, no longer defending its position, what's left is something rare: stillness without tension, awareness without noise. The voice that once seemed so urgent now fades into the hum of passing weather. And within that silence, something deeper stirs. Not a thought, not a belief, a state, a place the mind can enter when it no longer clings. A place so calming, so steady, it begins to reset everything it touches. This is not daydreaming. This is not sleep. This is absorption. This is jhana. And it's where the mind begins to heal from the inside out. Jhana is one of the most powerful yet overlooked tools in Buddhist meditation. It's not a mystical escape. It's not about visions or revelations. It's the natural byproduct of focused awareness and inner stillness. When the mind stops scattering itself across distractions, when it no longer reacts or chases or judges, it starts to settle. And if it settles deeply enough, it drops into a new kind of awareness. One that's unified, one that's quiet but intensely alive. This is jhana. There's nothing forced about jhana. You don't chase it. You create the conditions, and it arises. And those conditions are simple: steady attention, relaxation of effort, continuous presence. It's like tuning an instrument. Once the pitch is right, harmony happens on its own. The mind finds a new frequency, and that frequency starts to recalibrate everything below the surface. What's unique about jhana is how physical it feels, even though it's a mental state. The body begins to quiet, but not in sleep. Muscles soften, breath slows, heart rate stabilizes, and inside that physical silence, the brain begins to shift gears. Studies on deep meditative states show changes in brainwave activity that mirror the restorative functions of REM sleep, but with more clarity, more awareness, and more emotional regulation. During REM sleep, the brain processes memory, sorts emotion, recalibrates mood. In jhana, similar work happens, but without the chaotic dreaming. Instead of random firing, there's focused healing, neurological repair, emotional settling, mental spaciousness. It's not passive, it's not dissociation, it's active stillness. And the longer the mind can stay in this state, the more the system begins to rewire. Jhana is also deeply tied to the breath, not breath control, but breath awareness. The breath becomes the anchor. The whole body-mind system learns to ride the rhythm of the breath without interfering. And over time, this shifts the nervous system out of survival mode. Stress response fades. Cortisol levels drop. The mind learns that peace is safe, that stillness is sustainable. This matters, especially for subconscious reprogramming, because you can't rewire a mind stuck in fight or flight. You can't introduce new patterns to a brain that's still bracing for impact. Jhana opens the door. It's not about willpower. It's not about effort. It's about entering the exact state where change can happen naturally, without resistance. And this doesn't require years in a monastery. It starts with small windows of focused attention. The key is continuity. Letting the attention rest gently but steadily on one point, like the breath, or a sound, or the feeling of awareness itself. Not trying to do anything with it, just staying, just being. And when distractions arise, returning, without judgment, without analysis, just return. Eventually, the returning fades. There's less to come back from. The mind stays longer, attention deepens. The outer world fades, but not from sleep, because awareness remains. That's the entry into jhana, a place where the thinking mind steps back and a quieter knowing takes its place. Inside jhana, there is no narrative, no story, no self-concept, just presence. And from that presence, deep recalibration begins. Emotional loops unwind, old triggers lose their grip. The mind's need to obsess over past and future softens because it finally knows what it feels like to just be. This is why monks treat jhana as medicine, not escape, not entertainment. Medicine for the mind, the heart, the nervous system. A kind of silent therapy where the healing happens not from talking, but from resting in something deeper than thought. What's remarkable is that the effects of jhana last, not just during meditation, afterward. The mind retains a trace of that silence, a softness, a steadiness that lingers into conversation, into work, into stress. This is what makes it powerful for transformation. It doesn't just feel good, it changes how you move through the world. Jhana also disrupts the momentum of compulsive thinking. The mind that constantly narrates, worries, plans and replays has no place to stand inside absorption. The usual voices go silent, not because they're shut out, but because they have no fuel, no attention, and without attention, they dissolve. This is essential for subconscious reprogramming, because those voices, the inner critic, the doubter, the worrier, are not just habits, they're neural grooves, and jhana gently smooths those grooves out, not by force, but by absence, by withholding energy from the loops that no longer serve you. It also shifts the emotional baseline. Most people live with a background frequency of restlessness or low-grade anxiety. It's so constant, they don't even notice it until it's gone. Jhana gives the nervous system a taste of peace deeper than sleep, and once that taste is known, the system begins to crave it. Not like addiction, like coming home. This craving isn't desperate, it's healthy. It draws the mind toward stillness, not stimulation, toward reflection, not reactivity. And this begins to influence everything: what you read, how you speak, the people you're drawn to. The entire internal compass starts to shift toward peace. Jhana also helps unhook from identity patterns. When the mind experiences itself without self-reference, it starts to see how artificial those roles really are. The overachiever, the victim, the imposter, the perfectionist. All of it falls silent in deep absorption. And when the mind returns, it remembers the silence was more real than the role. This memory becomes part of your operating system. It changes how seriously you take your inner drama. It doesn't mean you stop feeling. It means you stop believing every emotion is a permanent truth. You feel more, but cling less. Jhana also sharpens perception, not just during practice, in daily life. Colors seem brighter, food tastes richer, attention gets stronger, because jhana trains the mind to focus without strain, to observe without judging. That clarity bleeds into everything else. It also improves emotional regulation, not by suppressing emotion, but by expanding the container. In deep stillness, emotions don't vanish. They unfold like waves in slow motion. The mind sees them before they peak. And that space allows for choice. The scream never comes. The shutdown never happens. The reaction stops before it starts. That's the silent power of jhana. It builds inner pause, inner space, not as a skill to be used, as a new default setting. And here's the most profound part. Jhana can be cultivated even in sleep. Not in the same depth as formal sitting, but enough to change the baseline of the subconscious. When the nervous system is used to resting in calm presence, that state begins to appear on its own, during rest, during dreams, even in moments of stress. You begin to notice that your dreams become quieter, that your mornings feel lighter, that your reactions soften, not because you tried harder, because your inner system is now calibrated to silence. This is not magic. It's conditioning. It's the result of showing the mind a new way to exist and letting it practice that way when resistance is lowest. Jhana is not a goal. It's not something to chase. It's a state the mind remembers how to enter once it stops trying to fix itself. It's a return, and every night you allow your system to rest in words like these, you're pointing the mind back to that return path. So even now, as you rest, the mind is adjusting, calibrating, rebalancing itself around a new center. Not thought, not story, not self, stillness. And from that stillness, everything changes, not all at once, but surely and deeply. And as the mind begins to stabilize in that deeper stillness, that unshakable absorption where reaction fades and awareness takes the lead, something else becomes possible, a deeper inquiry, not into how to calm the mind, but into what the mind actually is. Not just silence from thoughts, but clarity about the structure beneath them. When the turbulence settles, the components that create experience start to show themselves. And what becomes clear, perhaps for the first time, is that what we call self isn't one thing. It's a process, a bundle of parts, pieces moving so fast they create the illusion of one whole. And that illusion is what keeps habits stuck and suffering alive. But when you see through it, the system resets. And this is where the 5 skandhas come in. The 5 skandhas, or aggregates, are the building blocks of the mind's experience. They're not separate from life. They are life from the inside. They shape what you feel, what you believe, what you think you are. They function like a machine running in the background, building the sense of continuity that says, "This is me." But none of them, on their own or together, are a self. And when that's clearly seen, even for a moment, a kind of internal rigidity dissolves. The weight of identity starts to lift. The first aggregate is form. This is the physical body, the raw material of existence. Bones, skin, breath, heartbeat. It's the visible, tangible part of your experience. But even this is not static. The body changes moment to moment, cells dying, cells being born, breath rising, breath falling. The illusion comes when the mind overlays form with the story of my body, turning impermanent material into a permanent possession. But this possession can't be held. It shifts constantly. And when the mind stops clinging to the body as an anchor for self, fear around its changes begins to soften. The second aggregate is sensation. This is the feeling tone of experience, not emotion, just whether something feels pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. This arises in every moment of contact, a sound, a thought, a smell, and instantly the system assigns a tone. Pleasant? Move toward it. Unpleasant? Pull away. Neutral? Often ignored. This reactive loop happens automatically and drives most behavior. But when seen clearly, sensation becomes just another part, not a command, not an identity, just a flicker of feedback. Awareness can hold it without obeying it, and that pause between feeling and action becomes the ground of freedom. The third is perception. This is the labeling mechanism. It's how the mind recognizes patterns. Tree, anger, problem, safe. Perception builds meaning from raw data. It categorizes. It makes the world navigable, but it also filters everything through memory, through bias, through the lens of previous experience. That's why two people can see the same event and walk away with entirely different interpretations. Perception is useful, but it's not truth. It's constructed, and when that's realized, the grip it holds over reaction begins to loosen. You don't have to believe every label your mind throws at you. You can watch it apply meaning and let it pass. The fourth aggregate is mental formations. These are the habits of thought, the inclinations, the emotions, the intentions that color perception. They're built from karma, from past actions, repeated responses, cultural conditioning. They're the push behind most choices, the mood that forms before a thought, the urge before a decision. They're not fixed. They're deeply conditioned patterns. But because they feel internal, we often mistake them for identity. I'm just like this. I've always been this way. But mental formations change. They evolve. They dissolve when not reinforced. When the mind sees them arise and chooses not to react, they start to fade. This is where reprogramming takes root. The fifth aggregate is consciousness. This is awareness itself, but not pure awareness. It's the awareness that arises with a specific object. The knowing of a sight, the hearing of a sound, the awareness of a thought. It's tied to contact, and it changes with it. Consciousness is not one thing. It arises and passes based on conditions, but it moves so fast it appears continuous. That illusion of constant awareness creates the idea of a stable me. But when consciousness is observed closely, it reveals its shifting nature. One moment knowing sound, the next knowing breath, then thought, then emotion. A dance of knowing, but not a knower. Together, these five aggregates build what feels like a person. But they're not a person. They're processes, events, functions. And when any one of them is examined closely, it's seen to be empty of self. This emptiness is not nothingness, it's freedom. It means these aggregates don't own you, they don't bind you, they arise, they pass, and they can be met without fear. When the mind begins to see this, not just in theory, but through direct experience, identity starts to soften, reaction slows down. The compulsion to control everything fades, because the system stops defending a solid self that was never there. This insight also has profound implications for habit change. Most habits are built on the illusion of self. I always do this. I'm someone who struggles with that. But those sentences are just shorthand for a pattern of aggregates, a sensation, a perception, a mental formation, a reaction, all of which are impermanent. When they're no longer tied together by the idea of I, they become flexible, changeable, open, and this is exactly how mental habits reboot. Not through pressure, but through spacious awareness. When you see that what you call yourself is just the 5 aggregates interacting in real time, the grip of shame, doubt, fear, pride, all of it begins to loosen. Even pain becomes more workable. Physical pain is seen as sensation, not identity. Emotional pain is recognized as mental formation, not evidence of a broken self. Thoughts of despair or anxiety are noticed as movements of consciousness, not signs of failure. This shift doesn't remove difficulty, but it removes the extra suffering created by the belief in a solid me who is failing, broken, or stuck. The 5 aggregates also help dissolve future fear, because when you realize that there is no fixed self continuing into tomorrow, just an ongoing flow of changing conditions, there's nothing to protect, nothing to preserve. The mind relaxes into each moment, knowing that what it experiences now is not a permanent version of anything, just passing formations. This insight is especially powerful during deep rest and sleep-based reprogramming, because the subconscious often clings to continuity. It's the basis of most anxiety, the belief that who I am now will always feel this way. But when the aggregates are gently introduced during rest, through language, tone, repetition, the mind begins to let go of that belief. It starts to process fear as temporary. It holds sadness without bracing. It experiences thoughts without inheriting them. This opens space for new patterns, a new relationship to memory, to identity, to emotion. One based not on ownership, but on observation. Over time, even trauma is reframed. The event remains, but the I that holds it dissolves. The experience loses its grip because the container shifts. It's not suppression, it's not forgetting, it's spacious release. This is how the 5 aggregates function, not just as a description of experience, but as a path to liberation. When you stop identifying with any one of them, you stop suffering over their changes. And when you stop suffering over change, you become free. Each night this is heard, each time these words land in a soft and open mind, the system begins to rebuild itself, not around me, but around presence, around impermanence, around insight. And that insight becomes action. You stop speaking from fixed roles. You stop expecting others to stay the same. You let yourself evolve. You let others grow. You hold the world with less judgment because you see everything as process. Even sleep begins to change. Dreams become less about drama, more about release. The mind stops playing the same internal movies. because the cast and crew are gone. What's left is awareness, spacious, soft, free of narrative. That freedom is not theoretical, it's physiological. The body holds less tension, the breath opens, the jaw unclenches, the heart beats quieter, all because the mind stopped clinging to the illusion that there's a single, solid self holding it all together. There isn't. There never was. And now, you can rest in the space that opens once that truth is felt. And once the illusion of a fixed self falls apart, once the five skandhas are seen clearly as processes instead of a person, the mind no longer tightens itself into roles. Reactions lose their stickiness. Thoughts come and go without crashing into identity. There's a kind of internal freedom that can't be faked. But as that space opens up, a new tension can quietly sneak in, a question that doesn't speak loudly but still shapes every effort forward. Now that I see clearly, what do I do with it? Should I push harder to change, or let go completely? And in the silence between those two extremes, something else begins to emerge. A third way. The one the Buddha called the middle way. This path isn't about balance in the usual sense. It's not moderation between overdoing and underdoing. It's a deeper wisdom that sees both control and surrender for what they are, forms of clinging. One clings to progress, the other clings to release. One says, I must fix this. The other says, I must stop trying. Both are based on desire, both are rooted in identity, and both keep the cycle going. The middle way is different. It doesn't lean into force, and it doesn't collapse into passivity. It moves beneath both, quiet, steady, attentive. It lets effort rise when needed and fall away when not. It doesn't reject discipline. It doesn't chase comfort. It meets the moment exactly as it is, then responds. Not with panic, not with withdrawal, but with presence. This is not an easy concept for the modern mind. Most systems teach in binaries: go all in or give up, push through or let it be. But the middle way doesn't need those poles. It watches the impulse to control, then asks gently, is this coming from wisdom or fear? It watches the pull to let go, then whispers, is this real surrender or subtle avoidance? This is where peace becomes practical, not an abstract concept, not a distant reward, but something felt in the bones when the extremes fall away. In daily life, the pull toward control often hides in the language of self-improvement. I need to get better. I should already be further along. I have to fix this. The intention may be growth, but the energy behind it is pressure, striving without clarity. And that striving wears down the nervous system. It keeps the body tight. It floods the mind with dissatisfaction. No matter how much is achieved, it never feels like enough, because the improvement is built on the belief that who you are now is lacking. On the other side is surrender, often romanticized. Just let go. Whatever happens, happens. It's all meant to be. But this, too, can become a mask, a way of stepping back, not from wisdom, but from fear of failure. The surrender that avoids effort is not peace, it's resignation. It's a subtle story that says, I give up trying, so I can't be disappointed. The middle way moves differently. It asks what's appropriate now, not what should be done forever, not what would feel safest. just what fits this moment, with this energy and this clarity. It's not neutral, it's intelligent, active when needed, restful when wise, always grounded in awareness, never in escape. And this is where deep transformation begins to take hold. Because the habits that run the mind, perfectionism, procrastination, avoidance, obsession, they all rely on one of the two extremes. They need you to believe that control will save you, or that surrender is your only protection. When those narratives fall, the habits lose fuel. They can't find a home in presence. This teaching becomes especially powerful during subconscious reprogramming. In deep rest, the mind often drifts toward one polarity or the other, a loop of "I should be doing more" or "I'll never be able to change." But when exposed gently to the middle way, a third response forms. Not a thought, a tone, a kind of subtle willingness to meet whatever is here, not with judgment, not with resistance, but with enough clarity to know this is enough right now. The nervous system begins to recalibrate. The stress from striving starts to loosen. The fatigue from avoidance begins to lift. And what's left is a state that doesn't need to swing from effort to collapse anymore. The middle way is not a compromise. It's not a weak blend of opposites. It's a different movement altogether, one that trusts the moment to reveal the path forward instead of forcing one. And it works because it speaks directly to how the mind creates suffering. Suffering is rarely about the present moment. It's about the resistance to it. The belief that it should be different, that you should be different, that something needs to happen immediately to fix what's wrong. The middle way sees that belief and doesn't argue with it. It simply doesn't obey it. That refusal to obey the extremes becomes a new kind of strength, a quiet power that no longer needs to shout, that no longer needs to prove anything. It's the strength of being aligned, not pulled. In practice, it looks like this. You sit to meditate. The mind wanders. The old voice says, "You're not doing this right. Focus harder." Another voice says, "Why bother? Just let it go." The middle way steps in and says, "Just return." No guilt, no drama, just return. You face a difficult emotion. One part wants to suppress it, another part wants to drown in it. The middle way holds the feeling without collapse, without pushing it away. It says, "This too belongs. Let it be felt. Let it move." You set a goal. One impulse says, "Crush it. Hustle. Never stop." Another says, "It's too much. Just surrender." The middle way moves one step forward without attachment to the result. It doesn't seek to win or avoid losing. It seeks to act wisely, here and now. This path doesn't make you passive. It makes you precise. You don't waste energy on extremes. You don't live on edge. You live inside the moment, not ahead of it or behind it. And slowly, the mind begins to trust this path. The subconscious sees that things get done. Growth happens. Emotions pass. Without pressure, without panic, without retreat. That trust becomes the foundation for deeper change. Because when the mind trusts, it stops needing to control. When it trusts, it stops fearing surrender. It sees both as tools, not identities. Even identity itself begins to shift. You're no longer the achiever, no longer the spiritual avoider. You're simply here, responding with clarity, listening with care, moving with enough energy to match the moment, but never more than needed. And that is freedom. That's what the middle way offers. A life that doesn't swing, a mind that doesn't fight itself, a heart that doesn't overcompensate or shut down. This doesn't come all at once. It builds with every breath that meets the moment instead of resisting it, with every pause that interrupts the urge to control, with every gentle return to presence after the temptation to give up. This is what you're practicing now, just by listening, just by resting in this space. The words don't need to be analyzed. They don't need to be memorized. They are seeding something deeper, a new response to life, one that no longer swings between effort and collapse. So tonight, as the body continues to soften and the thoughts begin to slow, let this truth settle into the layers beneath your awareness. You don't need to fix everything. You don't need to abandon the path either. The third way exists, quiet, steady, always here. You've already found it. Just keep returning. And now we continue. And as the mind begins to taste the calm steadiness of the middle way, neither forcing nor fleeing, just meeting each moment with clean presence, there's a subtle shift that happens beneath the surface. For the first time, effort feels balanced. Peace stops being something to chase. But then, without warning, a new thought arises, a quiet hunger. The desire not for status or approval or control, but for awakening itself. The craving not for the world, but for peace, for stillness, for freedom. And at first, it seems harmless, even noble. But left unchecked, this subtle craving becomes the final obstacle, because now the desire is spiritual, and that makes it harder to see. This is the paradox of craving enlightenment. The mind sets out to let go by clinging. It tries to arrive by rushing. It wants to be still, but only after achieving a long list of inner goals. And the very thing it seeks becomes distorted by the way it seeks it. The path collapses into tension again, even though it's dressed in robes of silence. This is a common trap on any inner path. The ambition to reach enlightenment becomes a subtle form of ego reinforcement. Not the loud ego of pride, but the soft ego of spiritual becoming. It whispers, "You'll be whole once you get there. You'll finally be free when you feel constant peace. You'll matter when the mind stops thinking." But underneath those thoughts is the same engine that drives all suffering: craving. Buddhism teaches that craving is the root, not just of material suffering, but of spiritual dissatisfaction too. Wanting enlightenment is still wanting. Wanting to transcend suffering is still attachment to outcome. Even the desire to be a better meditator, to be more mindful, to be more compassionate, when pushed too hard, becomes just another identity to protect. The mind is clever. It will reshape the ego into whatever it thinks will survive. If the self is no longer validated by success or looks or approval, it will look for value in how awakened it is, how silent it feels, how far along the path it's come. And slowly, this new spiritual self becomes just as burdened as the old one, because it's still trying to be someone. It's still trying to become. But here's the truth that breaks the loop. Awakening isn't about becoming. It's about stopping. Stopping the chase, stopping the performance, stopping the idea that peace is somewhere else, waiting to be earned. Enlightenment isn't found by reaching it. It's revealed by no longer reaching. This doesn't mean the path ends. It means the way of walking changes. Instead of striving toward a distant goal, the mind starts to notice what's already here. Instead of comparing today's stillness to yesterday's distractions, it meets each breath with curiosity. Without measuring, without demanding, this shift changes everything. Meditation stops being a task and becomes rest. Reflection stops being self-analysis and becomes silence. Progress is no longer a measurement. It's just presence. This is how reprogramming begins on a deeper level. When the craving for awakening is seen as just another loop, the subconscious starts to let go of its obsession with arrival. It doesn't stop growing, it just grows without tension. You start to feel it in the body, less pressure in the chest, less strain in the breath. The nervous system stops tightening every time you sit to practice. You're no longer trying to have the perfect session. You're just here, letting the practice be what it is. Even the idea of practice starts to change. It's no longer a method to get somewhere. It's an expression of peace that's already within you. Something you're not building, but remembering. And slowly, the hunger that drove the search begins to soften. Not because it was wrong, but because it's no longer necessary. The mind starts to taste stillness without earning it. It starts to recognize that what it longed for was never far. It was just hidden behind the craving to find it. This is the great irony. The more you chase awakening, the more it hides. But when you stop running, stop reaching, stop needing, it begins to reveal itself in the smallest of moments. A breath, a pause, a sound, a feeling that doesn't need to be named. Awakening is not something you do. It's something that happens when doing stops being the focus. And this isn't about giving up the path. It's about releasing the tension that distorts the path. You still show up, you still listen, you still care. But you're not clinging to results. You're not measuring silence. You're not building a spiritual identity that needs to be defended. This is especially powerful during sleep reprogramming. Because when the conscious striving pauses, the subconscious has a chance to experience being without trying. It learns that safety doesn't come from arrival. It comes from presence. The body learns that peace doesn't require perfection. It requires permission. Permission to stop improving, just for now. This doesn't lead to laziness. It leads to freedom. You stop trying to change the weather of your mind. You just open the windows. Let it move. Let it shift. Let it be. And in that space, true change happens. Effort becomes natural again. Action becomes lighter. Insight becomes organic. Not because you earned it, but because you're not resisting it anymore. This doesn't mean ambition disappears. It just stops being heavy. You can still wish for clarity, still work toward understanding, still move toward compassion, but it's no longer fueled by fear. It's no longer a craving disguised as growth. It's simply what's arising now in a mind that trusts the path more than it needs to control it. Even language starts to shift. You stop saying, "I'll be enlightened when," and start feeling the question dissolve. There's no countdown, no checklist, no finish line, just the texture of this moment, raw and open, And maybe that's what awakening really is. Not a breakthrough, but the absence of urgency. Not a perfect state, but a peaceful stop. This insight settles deeper the more it's repeated. The subconscious begins to stop chasing itself in circles. The dream of perfection fades. What's left is still effort, but not the kind that grabs. It's the kind that grows. This is why so many great teachers speak of letting go as the final step, not letting go of life, letting go of the one who is obsessed with transcending it. When you meet life as it is, without trying to improve it into enlightenment, the most unexpected thing begins to rise. Clarity. Not dramatic, not glowing, but gentle. Like something familiar returning home. So tonight, as your breath settles and your mind begins to drift, let this truth float with you. There is nothing missing. There is nothing to prove. There is nowhere to get to. The peace you're looking for is already here. It always was. And once the grip around craving dissolves, once the pressure to arrive softens and the mind stops reaching for peace as if it were somewhere far away, something unexpected happens. The absence of grasping doesn't leave a void. It creates a doorway. What was once an effort becomes an opening. What was once a chase becomes a release. And in that release, the whole structure of the old mind begins to fade. Not violently, not with fanfare, but quietly, like something that has completed its cycle. The version of you that needed to control, to improve, to become, simply steps aside. And something else starts to breathe. This is where conscious rebirth begins. In Buddhist thought, rebirth isn't limited to what happens after death. That's one level. But the more transformative teaching points inward, that the self can die many times within a single life, that a person can be reborn not once, but again and again, without ever leaving the body. It doesn't require belief, it requires release, not of breath, but of identity, not of form, but of fixation. Psychological death is not a collapse. It's a surrender of the need to hold on to the old mental frame. The collection of patterns, beliefs, roles, wounds, and expectations that feel like you. They don't dissolve all at once, but with each deep seeing, each letting go, each moment of non-clinging, the old identity loses weight. And when enough of it has fallen away, what's left is not a better self, but a freer one. This kind of rebirth doesn't come from thinking your way out of pain. It comes from watching the story fall apart on its own. The story that says, I'm this kind of person. This is how I always react. This is what I can't let go of. These thoughts once felt like facts, but now they feel optional, repetitive, empty. Letting them go doesn't leave you with nothing. It reveals that you were never those thoughts to begin with. You were the awareness watching them. Always were, always will be. And when the identification with thought breaks, the version of you that depended on those thoughts begins to disappear. That is the death. Not dramatic, not painful, just a soft ending of what no longer makes sense. The old reaction stops. The old explanation doesn't hold. The old role feels too small. And then a pause. In that pause, something new begins. Not another identity, not another story, just space. From that space, new thought arises, new behavior, new perception, Not from pressure, not from should, from silence. This is rebirth. It's not about becoming someone else. It's about no longer carrying what was never yours. And in that emptying, a new way of being emerges. Not designed, discovered. You speak differently. You respond with less effort. You feel things more fully, but with less fear. The world doesn't change, but how you move through it does. This kind of shift often happens slowly, one layer at a time. The self has many levels, and they don't all dissolve at once. Sometimes you release a role you played for others. Sometimes a wound you carried alone. Sometimes a belief about what life was supposed to be. Each release is its own small death. Each one makes room for something lighter to rise. Rebirth doesn't need an audience. It doesn't need explanation. It's often invisible from the outside. But on the inside, it changes everything. You're no longer living from the same assumptions. You're no longer trapped in the same grooves. Even memory begins to change. The past remains, but it no longer shapes your future. It becomes a reference, not a ruler. And that shift in how memory functions is one of the most powerful signs that rebirth is happening. You no longer react from history. You respond from presence. This process also rewires the nervous system. Because identity is stored in the body, when the story of who you are breaks, the body responds. It starts to unhook from fight or flight, from freeze, from armor. Muscles that were always tense begin to soften. Breath becomes deeper without being controlled. The body no longer prepares to defend an identity that's fading. Sleep becomes easier. Stillness becomes natural. Decisions come with less friction, because the person who used to carry the tension is no longer driving the system. This is how deep healing happens. Not by fixing, by letting the old identity dissolve, by letting the false self die, not with violence, but with understanding. And this process can happen during rest, especially during sleep programming, because in sleep, the ego steps back, the stories pause, the subconscious becomes available, and when the right messages reach it, messages of permission to release, to soften, to let go of the false self, the whole structure begins to shift, without force, without needing to understand. The death of identity begins to happen quietly, cell by cell, breath by breath. The subconscious doesn't resist rebirth when it's introduced gently, when it's shown that letting go isn't danger, it's freedom. That the death of a mental role isn't annihilation, it's relief. Even the language of the mind changes. You stop saying, "This is just who I am," and start noticing, "This is just what I used to believe. This is what I used to feel." But now, that version is gone. This kind of rebirth can feel like waking up after a long sleep. You don't remember everything that changed. You just know you're different now, not in every way, but in ways that matter, in how you relate to pain, in how you carry joy, in what you no longer chase, in what you now allow. It's not a finish line. There's no final self to land on. That's the beauty. Rebirth is not once. It's a way of living. The mind lets go over and over. Each time it does, something softer rises. This is not instability. It's flexibility. A willingness to stop clinging to what no longer fits. A trust that something deeper will rise to meet the next moment. Even spiritual ambition fades in this space. You're no longer trying to arrive. You're simply allowing the next becoming to happen without pushing, without planning. You stop needing to explain yourself. You stop waiting for approval. You stop fighting your reflection. This is the clean slate the mind always thought it needed to earn, but it was never earned. It was only ever revealed when the old layers were allowed to fall away. And what's most beautiful, it doesn't require dramatic change. You don't have to move away, renounce everything, or start over in the material world. The rebirth is internal, silent, powerful. It begins in how you relate to this very breath. You stop carrying your past into the present. You stop dragging your future into the now. And what's left is this simple awareness, this direct contact with life, without the filter of an outdated self. So tonight, as your body softens and your mind moves closer to sleep, let these words carry you into that space. Let go of the version of yourself that doesn't need to survive the night. Let go of the thoughts that once protected, but now only repeat. Let go of the story that said you needed to hold it all together. You don't. Something else is rising now, something quiet, something clear. Let it. And as the old identity quietly dissolves, no longer something to fix, no longer something to defend, a new sense of space begins to open. What felt like self turns into sensation. What once felt solid now flows. And in that quiet transformation, something becomes clearer than ever before. The world outside was never separate from the mind that looked at it. The rebirth wasn't just in the self. It was in perception. The lens changed and the world changed with it. Because what's seen is never just what's there. It's what the mind makes of what's there. And now we begin to explore why that matters more than anything. How the mind itself shapes reality. This is the heart of the Yogacara teachings, the consciousness-only school of Buddhism. It doesn't say the world is fake. It says the experience of the world is created through layers of mind. Every sound, shape, color, word, feeling, reaction, it's all filtered. And those filters don't sit on top of the world, they sit inside you. Which means when you shift your consciousness, what you see, hear, feel, and understand also shifts. The mirror doesn't just reflect, it interprets, it labels, it remembers. And without knowing it, the mind begins to project past impressions onto present moments. What you think you're experiencing now is often an echo of something earlier. A conversation carries the voice of a parent from childhood. A look from a stranger carries the judgment of a teacher from years ago. A moment of silence feels like rejection, but it's just the past projected forward. This is not metaphor. It's how perception is built. The mind gathers impressions, called vasanas, and stores them like seeds. These seeds ripen when the right conditions appear. Someone speaks, and your mind doesn't just hear the words. It reacts through a filter shaped by old experiences. The result isn't just reality, it's a reflection of your consciousness. And this is where the power of change lives. Because if what you experience is filtered through mind, then changing the mind changes the experience, not in a forced way, in a deeply organic way. You don't have to fix the outer world. You shift the projector, you clean the lens, and the film begins to play differently. In Yogacara, this is more than positive thinking. It's deep rewiring. The subconscious holds not just thoughts, but patterns, deep emotional grooves that shape every reaction. These patterns color everything, and most of them were formed long before you could question them, which means most suffering comes not from what's happening, but from how it's being seen. Changing that doesn't require control, it requires awareness. When you start to see that the world is appearing through your habits of mind, you stop taking every reaction as truth. You start questioning why certain things always upset you, why some situations feel hopeless before they even begin. And that questioning doesn't just analyze, it unhooks the pattern. Yogacara teaches that there are 8 layers of consciousness, not just the waking mind, but deeper levels. The first 5 are tied to the senses: seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching. The 6th is the mind that interprets them, the thinker. The 7th is the ego consciousness, the one that clings to identity. And the 8th is the alaya vijnana, the storehouse consciousness. This is where the seeds are stored, the root layer, the quiet field where every habit, every reaction, every emotion has been planted. And here's what matters. This field can be cleaned. It can be replanted, not by thinking harder, not by analyzing everything you've ever felt, but by gently exposing the subconscious to new impressions, new messages, new emotional tones. Over time, the seeds shift, the ripening changes, and the movie of life begins to play differently. This is what deep meditation and sleep programming can do. When the conscious mind relaxes, the storehouse opens, and in that quiet access point, new seeds can be planted. Seeds of stillness, seeds of compassion, seeds of trust. Repetition isn't just about habit, it's about saturation. The more a new pattern is introduced, especially in restful, receptive states, the more the field begins to recondition itself. You don't erase old seeds. You stop watering them. You stop feeding the patterns that no longer serve you. And you start creating new roots, built on clarity instead of fear. This is why people begin to change, not just in how they think, but in how they feel the world. They walk into the same job, but don't carry the same anxiety. They hear the same criticism, but don't collapse under it. They face uncertainty, but don't spin into panic. The outer situation hasn't shifted. The projector has. The lens is cleaner. The mind isn't trying to overlay the past onto the present anymore. It's seeing with less distortion, less story, less projection. And this clarity deepens the more it's practiced. It becomes a loop in the opposite direction. Not a loop of confusion, but a loop of presence. The more you see things clearly, the less reaction you carry. The less reaction you carry, the more clearly you see. And round it goes, reality getting lighter. Not because the world changed, but because the way you met the world did. Even dreams begin to reflect this shift. When the mind starts to absorb these teachings deeply, the dream world starts to lose its usual chaos. Nightmares lessen. Emotional symbols change. The subconscious begins to mirror the cleaner lens. You wake up calmer, less tangled, more open. This is how Yogacara reaches into sleep and shapes it from the inside, not by controlling what you dream, but by changing what the mind believes is real, even when dreaming. You stop reacting in dreams the way you react in waking life. You begin to watch, to witness, to hold presence even in the middle of the subconscious theater. And that changes your relationship to waking life too. You stop assuming your reactions mean something deep about who you are. You start seeing them as seeds ripening, and that distance allows for choice. Awareness becomes the gardener, the mind becomes the field, and here's what's most powerful. This isn't an escape from life. It's a deeper entry into it. When the projections fade, what's left is not emptiness. It's direct experience. You're no longer talking to your past through other people. You're no longer filtering every emotion through old wounds. You're here, seeing, feeling, meeting life without the extra noise. This is not passivity, it's clarity. You can still act, still speak, still decide, but now your actions aren't shaped by distorted reflection. They're shaped by presence. This is why Yogacara is sometimes called the science of perception, because it doesn't tell you what to think. It shows you how you're thinking, and from that insight, the whole structure of suffering begins to collapse. Because what you think is the world is often just a reflection of your conditioning. And when you stop projecting that conditioning onto everything, the world becomes gentler, more spacious, more workable, not because it got easier, because your lens got cleaner. So tonight, as you rest in this space, let this truth settle into your deepest layers. Nothing needs to be changed for clarity to arise. You don't need to control your thoughts. You don't need to fix your emotions. You just need to meet them with enough awareness to stop feeding the old projections. Let the old seeds go dry. Let the new ones take root. Let the mirror reflect not your past, but your presence. And as the mirror of the mind begins to clear, no longer reflecting distortions, no longer coloring the world through unconscious patterns, a new kind of perception quietly takes root. Life becomes lighter, not because less happens, but because less is projected. Experiences unfold without being tangled in old stories. Even dreams begin to soften. The nightmares lose their edge. The symbols feel different. And in that space between waking and sleep, something opens. A doorway the conscious mind usually misses. A chance not just to rest, but to wake up within the resting. This is where dream yoga begins, not as fantasy, but as a tool for deep transformation. In Tibetan Buddhism, dream yoga is not about escapism. It's about insight. It's the practice of becoming aware within dreams, so the same clarity that guides waking life can begin to illuminate the subconscious. It doesn't reject dreaming. It trains the mind to recognize that dreaming is still mind, still experience, still a realm of karmic activity. And that makes it trainable. Most people spend a third of their lives asleep, and much of that time caught in dreams that run on autopilot. Emotions rise, scenarios unfold, characters act and react, but rarely does the dreamer recognize that none of it is solid. That recognition, lucid awareness, is what begins to turn a passive dream into a spiritual practice. Lucid dreaming is the first layer. It starts with simply knowing within the dream that it is a dream. That moment of realization, even if fleeting, can interrupt the usual logic of the subconscious. The dream doesn't end. It becomes fluid. choice reappears, perspective sharpens. And what's most powerful is this: fear starts to lose power. Because once the dreamer knows the tiger isn't real, the running stops. Once the fall begins, but is seen for what it is, the panic fades. This creates a new emotional blueprint. The subconscious learns that clarity is possible even in chaos, that freedom is available even in conditioned space. And when this realization deepens into dream yoga, it goes beyond control and into witnessing. The goal isn't to fly or change the setting or manipulate the dream for pleasure. It's to bring the same presence from meditation into the dream, to see how mind moves, how identity clings, how fear rises and passes, without reacting, without fixing, just being aware in the dream as if it were meditation in motion. This practice rewires the subconscious at a unique level. Because the dream state is where much of the emotional backlog gets processed, it's where unresolved fears rise, often symbolically. It's where identity patterns replay themselves in exaggerated form. Being conscious in that process allows for gentle intervention. A fear appears, and instead of fleeing, the dreamer watches. A conflict rises, and instead of fighting, the dreamer sees it unfold without judgment. Over time, the dream world becomes less threatening, not because it changes, but because the awareness inside it changes. The emotional body learns to stop tightening. The subconscious begins to associate presence with safety, even in confusion. This kind of rewiring cannot always be done in waking life. The defenses are too high, the patterns too quick. But in dreams, where logic is looser and images speak louder than words, the mind can begin to heal symbolically. Dream yoga also helps dismantle the fixed sense of self, because in a dream, the roles shift, the settings morph, the identity isn't stable. You might be someone else, somewhere else, feeling things disconnected from your daytime beliefs. And when awareness rises inside that instability, it teaches the deeper mind that self is flexible. Not in theory, in experience. That flexibility is essential for transformation. It breaks the illusion of permanence. It shows the mind that identity is just context plus memory. That fear doesn't need a backstory to feel real, and also doesn't need to be believed to lose power. With regular dream yoga, even nightmares begin to change. Not just because they're avoided, but because they're transformed. The fear is seen, the mind meets it, and the body learns it can be held, not just survived. This builds emotional resilience that carries into waking life. The same presence that watches a dream dissolve begins to watch waking fear dissolve too. The body stops reacting to every unknown. The mind begins to sit with discomfort longer. The heart learns it can stay open even in the presence of old pain. And this isn't about forcing control in dreams. It's about practicing presence in unfamiliar space. Lucid mindfulness isn't attention with strain. It's relaxed knowing. It doesn't need to analyze, it just sees. That kind of seeing becomes the new default in sleep, and then, slowly, during the day. Dream yoga also strengthens intention. Not willpower, intention. Before sleep, the dreamer sets a soft aim. Tonight, I want to be aware in the dream. Tonight, I want to meet whatever arises with kindness. That intention is planted in the mind before the conscious gate closes. And because the subconscious is impressionable, it listens. Sometimes it responds right away. Other times it takes repetition. But over time, the intention becomes a trigger. The dreamer starts to notice strange logic, a detail that doesn't fit, a repeated pattern. And suddenly the dream becomes lucid. The mind wakes up inside itself. That moment may only last a second, but it's enough to shift the emotional tone of the entire night. The body remembers the softness, the mind remembers the clarity, and when the dreamer wakes up, they carry a trace of that lightness into their day. Dream yoga also breaks the wall between states. You stop thinking of sleep as unconscious. You stop treating dreams as random. You begin to live with continuity of awareness, not perfect, but growing. The line between waking and dreaming gets thinner. And instead of chasing control in either space, you cultivate presence in both. This is what makes the practice sacred, not because it's rare, but because it's real. It doesn't rely on belief. It doesn't require special skills, just attention, just curiosity, just the willingness to wake up, even when the body is asleep. And that willingness grows the more it's invited. Every night you rest with these teachings, the subconscious learns to listen. Every time you drift off with awareness near the surface, the habit of unconscious dreaming weakens. You begin to fall asleep with a trace of mindfulness, not tense, not gripping, just enough knowing to remember, this too is part of the path. Over time, even the quality of rest changes. You wake up less tangled, less heavy, because the dreams aren't running wild through old trauma anymore. They're being met, witnessed, softened. You might start to notice a gentle joy rising during the night, a kind of reverence. Because awareness, when held with kindness, creates a kind of warmth that nothing else can replace. And that warmth is what the subconscious remembers most. So tonight, let that warmth fill the space behind your thoughts. Let it soak into the layers of mind that speak in symbols and feeling. Let it become the atmosphere of your rest, not as a goal, not as something to achieve, just as something you're finally allowing. You don't need to control your dreams. You only need to stay close enough to see them clearly. And as the veil between waking and dreaming grows thinner, as awareness begins to follow you, not only through your days, but through your nights, something begins to shift at the deepest level. The mind is no longer running from itself. The shadows that once filled sleep no longer feel like threats, but messengers. The fear starts to soften. The walls between past and present start to fall. And in that gentle space, there's one more thing that becomes visible, something older, quieter, harder to name. Not loud thoughts, not heavy emotions, but quiet structures underneath them. Invisible frameworks that shape how every thought forms, how every reaction feels. These are the fetters, and if left unseen, they remain the invisible chains that keep even the most peaceful mind from full freedom. In Buddhist teachings, the 10 fetters are the deep mental knots that bind beings to cycles of confusion, suffering, and rebirth. They're not surface-level struggles. They are the architecture of the reactive mind itself, and breaking them isn't about force. It's about deep, slow recognition, not with willpower, but with stillness, not with control, but with clarity. The first fetter is identity view, the belief in a fixed, separate self. This isn't a concept, it's a reflex, a deep-seated sense that experience is happening to someone, that there is a core me behind the thoughts, behind the choices, and even after seeing through it intellectually, the feeling of self remains. But when watched closely, especially during quiet moments, this sense of self begins to wobble. It's seen as a construction, a narrative, a reflex built from memory and resistance. And as awareness keeps touching that reflex without feeding it, it starts to loosen on its own. The second fetter is doubt. Not healthy curiosity, but the kind of inner confusion that keeps the heart closed. The doubt that says, maybe none of this works, maybe freedom isn't real, maybe I'm the one who can't do it. This doubt doesn't scream, it whispers, it pokes holes in presence, and it cannot be argued with. It must be seen. When it's met, not with panic, but with patience, it slowly stops anchoring itself. You begin to recognize that doubt isn't a warning, it's a habit, and that habit fades when the mind stops chasing certainty and starts resting in what is. The third is attachment to rites and rituals, not respect for practice, but the clinging to form over essence. The belief that specific actions or traditions guarantee awakening. This fetter hides beneath good intentions. It turns methods into magic. But freedom doesn't come from form. It comes from understanding. When this is seen clearly, the heart stops mistaking repetition for realization. You keep the practices that bring clarity and release the ones that turn into superstition. The fourth fetter is sensual craving. This isn't about denying beauty. It's about the unconscious reaching for stimulation to escape discomfort. Food, sound, attention, stimulation, none of them are problems until the mind clings to them for relief. When awareness begins to notice craving as movement instead of identity, the energy behind it changes. Craving feels less like desire and more like restlessness. And restlessness doesn't need to be satisfied. It can be seen. It can be held. And in being held, it begins to settle. The fifth is ill will. Not just anger, but the subtle resistance to anything unpleasant. The quiet pushback against discomfort. The rejection of now. This fetter often hides behind self-righteousness. It justifies itself. But when awareness meets ill will without agreeing or resisting, its heat cools. You begin to feel the first wave of resistance rise and simply stay still. That stillness breaks the chain. The first 5 fetters are called the lower fetters because they tie beings to the realm of identity and reaction. The next 5 are more refined. They don't scream, they hum. But their grip is just as strong until it's seen through. The 6th fetter is craving for form. This is the desire for refined states of peace, for bliss in meditation, for pleasant experiences in subtle realms. It's not about material comfort anymore. It's about spiritual pleasure. But the pattern is the same. Clinging. When this craving is seen, the need to recreate past stillness begins to fade. You stop chasing states and start resting in presence. The 7th fetter is craving for formless existence. This is even subtler. It's the longing to escape all form, all limitation. It hides in spiritual language, words like transcendence and purity. But at its root, it's still grasping, a more sophisticated version of running away. Awareness breaks this not by rejecting peace, but by not needing to escape into it. You learn to stay with reality, no matter how unrefined it feels. The eighth is conceit. This doesn't always look like arrogance. Often it hides as comparison, the sense of being better, worse, or equal to others. All three are rooted in self-reference. They reinforce the illusion of separateness. When awareness begins to feel how comparison limits connection, conceit starts to dissolve. You no longer need to measure your path against another's. You simply walk. The ninth fetter is restlessness, not the obvious fidgeting, but the subtle inability to stay with what is. The pull to shift attention, to adjust, to fix, to plan. Restlessness is the vibration of becoming. It resists stillness. But when the mind begins to see this movement as optional, not urgent, it starts to quiet. You learn to stay, even through the mind's attempt to move. That staying becomes freedom. The 10th and final fetter is ignorance. Not stupidity, not lack of education, but not seeing. The base misperception that holds all the others in place. The illusion of permanence, of self, of control. Ignorance dissolves not through knowledge, but through insight. Not through collecting facts, but through seeing the nature of reality directly. When the aggregates are seen as impermanent, when craving is seen as suffering, when awareness watches all things rise and fall without clinging, ignorance begins to fall apart. None of these fetters can be destroyed through force. They are rooted in survival patterns, in subtle conditioning, and any attempt to break them aggressively only reinforces their grip. They don't need to be fought. They need to be seen, clearly, gently, again and again. This is where true transformation happens, not through resistance, through awareness. When you sit with a fetter, not to fix it but to feel it, something begins to melt. The mind doesn't need to push it away. It just stops fueling it. And this is why sleep programming is such fertile ground, because in sleep, the resistance is lower, the grip of ego is lighter, the mind is open to new messages. When the subconscious is gently exposed to the possibility of non-clinging, it begins to unwind the fetters one breath at a time. You don't need to map every fetter. You don't need to track your progress. Awareness will reveal what's ready. And when it does, the next knot begins to loosen. The chain begins to break, not with a snap, but with a soft breath. This isn't about escaping humanity. It's about living it with less distortion, less tightness, less fear. Each fetter that falls brings more space, more compassion, more peace that doesn't rely on conditions. So, tonight, as your body softens and your breath slows, let these old bindings surface without fear. You don't need to name them. You don't need to fight them. Just stay close. Just watch. Let awareness do what effort never could. The mind knows how to free itself, if it's allowed to feel without grasping. And now, we continue. And as the inner chains start to weaken, not snapped, but softened through still attention, something new begins to appear beneath the surface. Not a new identity, not a different version of the self, but a kind of space that was always there, only hidden behind movement. No longer pushed by craving, no longer pulled by resistance, the mind finds itself in a strange and powerful place. Nothing to fix, nothing to hold, just presence. Just a pause deep enough that something ancient inside begins to heal on its own. This is not silence as most know it. It's not the absence of noise. It's not being quiet to appear calm. It's something deeper, something cleaner. This is noble silence, a reset that doesn't come from doing, but from stopping. In the Buddhist tradition, noble silence is often spoken about in terms of external speech. Silence of the mouth, not engaging in chatter, not filling the space with unnecessary words. But at its heart, noble silence is internal. It's the quiet that happens when the mind stops narrating, when thoughts still come, but the voice that claims ownership goes quiet, when sensations still arise, but the need to name, analyze, or explain them fades. This kind of silence isn't just peaceful, it's transformational. Because in that silence, programs begin to shift, not through effort, through absence of interruption. Much of what clutters the inner world are stories, loops of thought that keep emotions trapped in place. Something is felt, but before it has a chance to move, the mind rushes in to label it, to judge it, to ask why it's there, to dig for a cause. And in that reaction, the feeling stays stuck. It doesn't get released. It gets looped, repeated, prolonged. But when silence is held, not as suppression, but as allowing, those feelings complete their cycle. They rise, they swell, they dissolve, without being touched by commentary, without being dressed in meaning, without becoming part of identity. This is what makes noble silence so rare. It requires doing nothing with precision, not avoidance, not zoning out, not distraction, but staying with what's here and refusing to interrupt it, refusing to narrate the moment into something familiar. When this kind of silence deepens, the subconscious begins to trust the space. It begins to open the vault. Old impressions start to rise, not because you're digging, but because the system knows it's safe now. It's not being judged, it's not being rushed, it's being witnessed. And in that witnessing, the mind begins to reprogram itself. This kind of reset doesn't happen during noise. It doesn't happen during analysis. It happens during presence, the kind of presence that lets a thought come and doesn't follow it, that lets a memory rise and doesn't retell it, that holds an emotion without asking it to leave. Most emotional damage isn't caused by the original pain. It's caused by the commentary built around it, the conclusions drawn, the roles created, the identity formed in reaction. Silence cuts through all of that, not by force, but by staying out of the way. It's in this space that clarity is born, not new ideas, not plans. Clarity that sees what's always been true, but never had room to speak. The kind of truth that doesn't come from logic. It comes from contact with what is, free from noise. And this truth doesn't speak in language. It moves through the body, through shifts in posture, through deeper breath, through tension that leaves without explanation. The nervous system, long conditioned to brace and defend, begins to settle into the background of this silence. Even the breath changes. It stops performing. It becomes natural, rhythmic. The mind, sensing no threat and no task, begins to synchronize with the body again. Thought slows. Awareness spreads, not dulled, but wide open. This is noble silence, not as technique, but as refuge. The ego cannot survive in this space, not because it's destroyed, because it has nothing to attach to. It can't narrate, it can't compare, it can't define, it drifts to the side. And what's left isn't emptiness, it's peace without edge. This silence is what allows internal systems to reboot. Patterns that have been running for years begin to unwind, not because you're actively solving them, but because you're no longer feeding them with attention. They no longer feel necessary. The loop was fueled by the noise. Without it, the loop loses energy. This is why deep retreats often use silence as their foundation, because silence isn't an absence, it's a teacher. It shows you where your resistance lives. It reveals where the mind still clings, not to punish, but to invite release. When silence becomes regular, not as escape, but as practice, the personality itself begins to soften. Reactions feel less sharp. Preferences feel less rigid. The need to prove or defend starts to fade. You're no longer reacting to every word, every glance, every shift in your surroundings. You're resting in something stable, something quiet. And that quiet becomes a kind of inner home. This home is always available, but most people pass it by because they're waiting for silence to feel comfortable before they enter. But silence often feels uncomfortable at first. It brings up everything the noise was covering. That's why most avoid it. They fill the space because stillness feels unfamiliar, but the unfamiliar is where the transformation lives. If you stay, if you let the discomfort rise and fall without feeding it, silence begins to change its texture. It goes from empty to full, from blank to sacred. It begins to feel like the ground of your being, not a break from your life. That's when true reprogramming begins, because now the system isn't just less reactive, it's more receptive. It's no longer stuck in the same defense strategies. It's open to new input, not because it was forced, but because the noise that blocked it has finally quieted. This is where sleep becomes powerful, because sleep, when held with gentle awareness, amplifies noble silence. The body may rest, but the inner space doesn't disappear. If anything, it expands. Thoughts slow, identity fades, and the subconscious begins to move in that silence, like water finding its own level. When this becomes regular, when you fall asleep not with mental chatter, but with gentle, open presence, the mind starts to associate rest with clarity. The emotional body stops bracing. The breath begins to guide the nervous system back to baseline. This reset doesn't just prepare you for tomorrow. It rewrites how you hold the past, how you respond to the future, how you meet each moment when it comes. This is not theoretical, it's physiological, it's neurological. When the brain stops being fed constant noise, it starts to prune the unused pathways. It starts to strengthen the ones connected to calm. This isn't done through force. It's done through stillness, the kind that doesn't need to think its way to peace. It simply stops adding to the problem. And over time, this kind of silence teaches the mind that not every question needs an answer, that not every problem is real, that not every fear needs a plan. Some things simply pass when they're no longer narrated. So tonight, let this be your atmosphere. Not silence, as an absence, but silence as a living space, as a reset that happens not with pressure, but with presence. Let the breath be quiet. Let the thoughts slow without being stopped. Let the body drift without being controlled. You don't need to solve anything right now. You don't need to analyze what's rising. Just let it rise. Let it move. Let it go. The mind will update itself when you stop interrupting the process. Let the silence do its work. And as noble silence becomes more than just a pause, as it begins to rewire the nervous system, soften mental noise, and teach the heart to sit without judgment, what starts to emerge beneath that quiet is something many never notice until it's gone. A voice, not spoken out loud, not heard with the ears, but always there, always running. It comments, it questions, it narrates, it repeats. It tells the story of who you are, what others meant, and how the day went. This voice shapes more than moods. It shapes identity. It shapes decisions. And yet, it often goes unnoticed. But once awareness settles enough to hear it clearly, it becomes obvious. This voice is not neutral. It carries karma, and the way it speaks leaves marks, not just outside in conversation, but inside, deep within the subconscious. This is the karma of speech, not punishment, not superstition. Karma simply means cause and effect, and speech, both external and internal, is one of the most overlooked causes in the human experience. Words are not just noise, they are actions, and actions have consequences. Even thoughts, when repeated with enough emotional weight, become a kind of internal speech, and that speech leaves grooves in the mind. Grooves that shape how experience is filtered, how worth is felt, how fear is interpreted. These grooves are not destiny, but until they're seen, they act like it. Most people speak to themselves in ways they would never speak to someone they love, harshly, critically, with sarcasm or dismissal. And over time, that inner speech becomes the voice of reality. The subconscious doesn't analyze tone, it absorbs it. Every time the internal voice says, "You always fail," the body hears it. Every time it says, "No one really cares," the emotional system listens. These phrases, said silently and often, become background programming, not because they're true, but because they're familiar. The problem isn't just what's said, it's how it's said. Tone matters. Intention matters. A soft voice carries a different karma than a sharp one. A doubtful whisper leaves a different trace than a kind reminder. And these tones form layers in the mind, layers that eventually affect behavior, confidence, even health. Reprogramming begins with noticing this voice, not to silence it, but to hear it without becoming it. The shift starts when awareness steps in between thought and identification. When the thought says, "I'll never change," awareness simply hears it without agreement. When the voice says, "This is too much," awareness doesn't argue. It listens. That listening breaks the automatic response. That listening creates space. In that space, new speech can be introduced. Not fake positivity, not forced affirmations, but speech rooted in truth and compassion. Words that acknowledge struggle without becoming it. Tones that support instead of critique. Internal sentences like, "This is hard, but I can breathe through it," carry a different energy than, "I can't take this anymore." Both may rise. Only one needs to be believed. This kind of rewiring takes repetition, but not effortful repetition, not chanting mantras with gritted teeth. It takes gentle consistency, a willingness to notice the harmful voice and let it dissolve again and again. A willingness to replace it softly with something kinder. Over time, the subconscious begins to absorb this new tone, and what was once reactive becomes calm. What was once self-punishing becomes self-trusting. Even external speech reflects this change. The more the internal voice softens, the more external communication shifts. Not because you're trying to sound different, but because you feel different. Words become slower, less defensive, more curious. Listening improves, conflict softens, the need to prove dissolves, because the inner dialogue is no longer a battleground. And when you speak differently to others, the external karma changes too. Words uplift or depress. They connect or divide. They create momentum or resistance. Every conversation plants seeds. And when those seeds are planted with awareness, they grow into relationships that reflect peace, not performance. But it all starts inside. Most of the inner voice is inherited from parents, from school, from culture, from early experiences that taught the nervous system how to protect itself with thought. The mind repeats these voices not because they're helpful, but because they feel like home, even if that home is painful. Recognition breaks the spell. The moment you hear the voice as a pattern, not a person, you gain the freedom to choose something else. And that choice doesn't need to be loud. It can be as small as noticing a harsh thought and replacing it with silence, or saying gently, "That's not true anymore," or even just breathing and letting the voice float by without comment. This isn't denial, it's discernment, because not every thought deserves a microphone, not every fear needs narration, not every memory needs a moral. Over time, the body begins to respond. Muscle tension eases, the breath slows, the chest opens, because the internal voice is no longer a threat. It becomes a companion, a quiet presence instead of a judge. Sleep becomes deeper, waking becomes lighter, emotional pain becomes easier to hold, because the voice holding it has changed. Even dreams begin to shift. The subconscious starts to reflect the new tone. You stop waking with dread. You stop carrying yesterday's criticism into today's decisions. You begin to hear the new voice before the old one finishes speaking. This is the subtle power of karmic speech. It shapes your world from the inside out. The Buddha taught that right speech isn't just what you say to others, it's what you say to yourself. It's how the mind communicates with its own layers. And when speech becomes aligned with awareness, with care, with truth, karma shifts. This doesn't mean the inner critic disappears. It means it stops leading. It means the wiser voice, the one that sees clearly, holds gently, and speaks only what's needed, becomes louder, not in volume, but in presence. This voice doesn't rush. It doesn't dramatize. It doesn't try to fix you. It simply reminds you of what's true, of what's steady, of what's already whole beneath the noise. And this voice can be trained through meditation, through reflection, through repetition in sleep states. The brain is always listening, and when it hears a kinder rhythm, it starts to change the music of the mind. That change is slow, it's quiet, but it's lasting. It shows up when you wake up and the first thought isn't dread, but calm. It shows up when you fail and the voice doesn't punish. It reassures. It shows up when you speak and your words carry clarity instead of defense. That's when you know the karma is shifting. Not because you've added anything fake, but because you've stopped repeating what no longer serves. So tonight, as you drift into rest, let the internal voice soften. Let the words slow. Let the sentences become fewer. You don't need to solve anything right now. You don't need to correct yourself. Just listen. And where there is silence, let that silence speak in kindness. Let it shape what comes next. And as the voice within softens, no longer tearing down, no longer gripping tightly to old scripts, what starts to rise in the silence isn't just relief, it's memory. Emotional layers long buried, fragments that never found closure, pain that never got to finish unfolding. But this time, it doesn't come with panic. It arrives quietly, curiously, like something waiting to be seen clearly for the first time. The internal voice is no longer interrupting, and so the deeper material finally speaks. Not to hurt, not to rewind, but to be transformed. And this is where the most powerful alchemy begins. Not the escape from suffering, but the turning of suffering into fuel. This is the lesson of the lotus in the mud. In Buddhist imagery, the lotus flower is more than beautiful. It's a symbol of transformation. Because it doesn't bloom in clean water, it grows from mud. Thick, dark, nutrient-rich mud. Its roots are hidden in what most would call unworthy, unclean, impure. And yet the blossom is untouched by the dirt it rises from. That's not coincidence. It's metaphor for the mind, for life, for suffering itself. The lotus grows not in spite of the mud, but because of it. The very conditions that seem unspiritual, undesired, heavy, those are the conditions that feed the flower. And this isn't just poetic, it's practical, because every mind holds its own version of mud: regret, anger, shame, fear, loneliness, old stories, old grief, patterns that seem like burdens but under the right conditions become seeds for awakening. The mistake most people make is trying to get rid of the mud, suppress it, hide it, transcend it. But in Buddhist practice, the mud is not your enemy. It's the starting point. It's the teacher. It's the raw material that, when touched with awareness, becomes the very thing that helps you grow. This transformation doesn't happen through effort. It happens through relationship. The way you relate to pain determines what it becomes. If you resist it, it hardens. If you cling to it, it grows heavier. But if you hold it gently, with attention but not identification, it starts to soften. And in that softening, it begins to change. This is the heart of mindful alchemy, not changing pain into pleasure, but changing resistance into presence, changing the instinct to run into a willingness to stay. That shift changes everything. Emotions like grief or rage or despair carry energy. That energy is not toxic in itself. It becomes heavy when it's repressed or clung to. But when awareness meets it fully, without analysis, without story, it starts to unfold. The energy releases, insight follows. This is why suffering, when met directly, often leads to clarity. It breaks down defenses. It reveals what matters. It strips away what's false. And in that empty space, a new way of being can take root. The lotus grows toward light because it has to. That's its nature. And the mind, when not blocked by resistance or judgment, does the same. It wants to rise. It wants to awaken. But the path upward is fueled by what was once below. Even the most intense suffering, loss, betrayal, trauma, can become fuel. Not by glorifying it, not by pretending it didn't hurt, but by allowing it to deepen your awareness, to soften your certainty, to expand your compassion. Many people discover this after the pain. They look back and see that the hardest moments changed them, gave them empathy, broke down arrogance, opened the heart. But what if that transformation didn't have to wait? What if the pain could be seen differently while it's here? That's the power of mindful presence. It doesn't need time to rewrite pain. It needs willingness. The willingness to stop asking, "Why is this happening?" and start asking, "How can I meet this clearly?" Pain is inevitable, but suffering is the added story, the inner resistance, the identification, the comparison. This shouldn't be, "I'm failing." This means, "I'm broken." These thoughts don't help. They trap the mud, they harden it. But the lotus doesn't try to change the mud, it grows through it. In practice, this means sitting with sadness and not trying to explain it. Holding anger without needing to direct it outward. Letting shame arise without attaching to its narrative. These moments are not easy, but they are sacred, because they are the moments when the system starts to trust itself again. When the mind learns it can hold pain without being shattered. This builds emotional resilience, not by toughening the heart, but by softening it. You become strong not because you suppress emotion, but because you can feel it without drowning. That capacity grows each time pain is met with attention instead of reaction. Over time, the mud becomes less frightening. You stop fearing dark moods. You stop avoiding uncomfortable truths because you've seen again and again that they pass, that they bring wisdom, that they contain hidden roots of growth. This also changes how you relate to others. You stop needing people to be perfect. You stop judging their mess because you've sat with your own. And that sitting taught you that beneath every outburst is a wound. Beneath every defense is a fear. And beneath every fear is the longing to be free. That understanding creates compassion, not sentimental kindness, but grounded empathy. The kind that sees someone's mud and knows there's a flower waiting to grow. Even dreams begin to shift. The more your waking mind stops resisting emotional pain, the more the subconscious reflects that. Nightmares turn into messages. Recurring symbols lose their edge. The inner world becomes less reactive, more revealing, because it's no longer hiding what you've already learned to face. This shift is subtle. It doesn't always look like progress. Sometimes it looks like stillness, like sitting with an ache and not moving away, like waking up with sadness and not needing to fix it. That stillness is growth, because it means the mud is no longer being feared, it's being felt. And when it's felt fully, it changes shape. Not into joy, not into bliss, into something more real. Presence, depth, truth. You begin to move through life with less performance, more honesty, less armor, more breath. You start to live from the root instead of the reaction. And that's when the lotus opens. Not because the mud disappeared, but because you stopped believing the mud meant something was wrong. So tonight, as the quiet grows deeper and the mind begins to let go, let the mud be here. Let the old emotions rise without panic. Let the memories pass without meaning. Let the pain show itself without needing to be chased or cured. It's not the enemy, it's the soil, it's the source. Let it feed what's coming next. And now we continue, and as the mind finally begins to accept the mud for what it is, not a flaw, not a failure, but the starting point for something profound, what once felt like a burden becomes a kind of nourishment. Not all at once, not as an epiphany, but as a quiet shift in how suffering is held. No longer avoided, no longer clung to, pain becomes part of the unfolding, and that unfolding reveals something even deeper, something hiding in the structure beneath every emotion, every memory, every expectation. The hidden framework that keeps the loop of suffering alive. Time. Not the kind on a clock, not the passing of days, but mental time. The idea of past and future as real, solid things. The belief that yesterday is something we carry and tomorrow is something we owe. This illusion isn't just a concept. It's a trap, and what keeps trauma and anxiety alive is not the event, it's the time framework the mind uses to hold it. In both Zen and Theravada Buddhism, the illusion of linear time is seen as one of the most subtle but powerful obstacles to freedom, because it gives the mind a story to live inside, a before and an after, a what happened and a what could happen, and in that split, presence disappears. The past, in memory, becomes a weight. Not because it's still happening, but because it's still being repeated. Not consciously, automatically, through thoughts, feelings, reactions that trace back to moments that no longer exist. The mind pulls them forward, overlays them on now, and treats them as current. This is how trauma lives on, not in the body alone, but in the mind's time structure. The future, on the other hand, becomes pressure. Endless what-ifs, imagined failures, plans upon plans that never settle. And this anxiety becomes real, not because it's true, but because the mind believes in tomorrow as something it must prepare for at all times. Both are illusions, not because nothing ever happened or will happen, but because neither the past nor the future exists as experience. Only thought, only mental projections. This isn't philosophy, it's medicine. When the mind begins to feel the illusion of time directly, not just think about it, but see through it, something releases. The nervous system begins to relax, the breath deepens, not because everything is resolved, but because the framework that held the pressure starts to dissolve. The present moment in Buddhism is not a cliché. It's the only real point of contact, not a second on a watch, but the direct knowing of experience right now. The sensation, the breath, the awareness. Everything else is memory or imagination. And when the mind lives outside the now, suffering increases, because it's trying to manage something it can't touch. You can't touch yesterday. You can't touch tomorrow. You can only imagine them. And yet the body reacts to them as if they are here. This is why fear arises before anything happens, why grief lingers long after the moment passes, why shame repeats itself for years. Because the mind believes in the line of time, and the body follows. Theravada teachings point to this directly. Everything arises and passes moment by moment. There is no stable thing continuing through time, not in thought, not in identity. Even the mind is not a river. It's a series of drops, each one fresh, each one fading. When this is seen clearly, the need to fix the past or prepare the future softens. Zen cuts even sharper. It doesn't explain, it points. When asked about time, a Zen master doesn't give theory. He asks, "Show me your past. Where is it?" Or says, "Drink tea." Because the teaching isn't in the words, it's in the cut. The moment you leave the now, the practice stops, the illusion begins. Zen trains the mind not to destroy time, but to stop believing in it, to move with life without adding narrative, to walk without dragging memory behind or chasing future versions of self. This shift is subtle but practical. It changes how you wake up, how you work, how you relate. No longer projecting into what might happen, you deal with what's here. No longer reacting to what already passed, you meet what's now. Even regret begins to feel different. It loses its grip, not because you ignore it, because you stop living in it. It's seen as a thought, not a sentence, a shadow, not a truth. The same with fear. Most fear is about what hasn't happened. The body braces for a future it can't see. But when the timeline collapses, the fear often collapses too. Because in this breath, right now, there is space, there is calm, and the body begins to trust that. This doesn't mean you forget your story. It means you stop becoming your story every time you think it. Sleep becomes deeper when this insight lands, because much of restlessness at night is about time, the future you're not ready for, the past you can't forget, thoughts spinning. But when the mind is reminded that none of that is here now, the system releases. Not always instantly, but with practice the body learns. There is no tiger, no deadline, no replay, just presence, just stillness. This is where the most powerful healing happens, not from rewriting time, but from stepping out of it, from seeing that each breath is fresh, that you don't need to drag the old version of you into every room, that the pressure to become can drop. This opens the door to joy, not the joy of arrival, the joy of relief, of dropping the weight, of waking up without past eyes or future tension, of seeing what's here and knowing it's enough. And even when pain is here, that too becomes lighter, because it's no longer wrapped in history, it's no longer inflated by what it could mean tomorrow. It's just sensation, just emotion, just this moment. And this moment, no matter how intense, is always bearable when it's not multiplied by time. Practicing this doesn't require hours of meditation. It starts with noticing. When do you leave now? When does thought drift into yesterday's wound or tomorrow's worry? Can you feel it? Can you return? Each return is a reset. Each time you feel the breath, hear the sound, notice the body, you've dropped out of time. You've returned to what's real. And when this becomes a rhythm, life shifts. You stop rushing, you stop rehearsing. You begin to meet each moment like a guest, not a problem. That meeting becomes your new home. And in that home, you're no longer ruled by what was or what might be. You're here, fully, freely, finally. So tonight, let the future go dark. Let the past go quiet. Let the breath be the only thing you follow. Nothing else is needed. Nothing else is real. You are not behind. You are not ahead. You are here. And now we continue. And as the concept of time begins to collapse, not in a rush of thought, but in a deep slowing down of attention, something becomes startlingly clear. The mind that was always running forward or reaching backward now begins to rest in the only place it can ever truly be. And in that rest, one sees what has been hiding beneath the motion all along, a kind of hunger, not for food, not even for love in the ordinary sense, but for something less defined, a need to feel full, safe, seen, whole. That need keeps shaping behavior without asking permission, and even when time has dropped away, the pull still lingers. What is it? This is where Buddhist psychology offers one of its most haunting metaphors, the hungry ghost realm. In Buddhist cosmology, it's not a physical place. It's a state of being, a realm inhabited by beings with enormous stomachs and tiny mouths, always starving, always reaching, never satisfied. Their suffering isn't because food doesn't exist. It's because they can never get enough of it. Their craving distorts their capacity to receive. This metaphor, though ancient, has become one of the most accurate reflections of modern life, because many live as hungry ghosts without knowing it, not in supernatural realms, but in the realm of endless scrolling, constant comparing, chasing more followers, more likes, more things, more validation. But no matter how much comes in, the emptiness doesn't fill, because the mouth is too small, because the craving has rewired the nervous system to expect more than it can ever actually use. And this is not a judgment. This is a reflection. Because the hungry ghost isn't evil. It's wounded. It's misunderstood. It's built from emotional scarcity. Moments in early life where needs weren't fully met, not just physical needs, but the need for safety, attunement, presence. That lack creates an imprint, a subtle wound that says, I don't have enough, or worse, I am not enough. From that wound, craving grows. But modern craving doesn't look desperate. It looks normal. It's woven into the culture. Constant updates, notifications, status, consumption. People laugh about doom scrolling. They joke about refreshing apps. But underneath the humor is a nervous system that no longer knows how to rest. This is the hungry ghost in disguise, the ache that keeps checking the phone, not because there's something to see, but because something inside feels unfed. The mind doesn't need more data. The body doesn't need more caffeine. The heart doesn't need more digital attention. But the wound has been layered over with stimulation. And stimulation becomes a substitute for nourishment. The tricky part is that it works, briefly. The scroll gives a hit of novelty. The like gives a flicker of importance. The purchase gives a moment of control. But the relief never lasts. Because it wasn't feeding the root, it was feeding the craving. This is what the hungry ghost realm teaches so powerfully, that suffering comes not just from not having, but from the inability to receive, from the distortion of the channel, from the small mouth, not the big world. And that distortion can be rewired, not by resisting craving, not by punishing it, but by bringing awareness to it in a new way, noticing what drives the reach, sitting with what rises before the scroll, listening to the feeling that precedes the habit. That moment between urge and action is where healing begins. Because the craving is not wrong. It's a signal. It says something inside is aching, not for distraction, not for noise, but for presence, for connection, for enoughness. When that signal is seen clearly, the urge loses power, not because it disappears, but because it's no longer mistaken for truth. The craving isn't who you are. It's what the nervous system learned to do to feel safe. And it's possible to teach it something else, to pause instead of grab, to breathe instead of refresh, to feel instead of scroll. This doesn't mean you'll never reach again. It means the reach will no longer define your worth. And in that shift, the subconscious begins to reprogram itself. Not through discipline, through understanding. Because when craving is met with kindness, it begins to dissolve. It doesn't need to be filled. It needs to be seen. This is why deep practice, including mindfulness during sleep, can change craving at its root. Because the hungry ghost lives not in the logical mind, but in the emotional memory. In the layers of subconscious thought that say, I must keep searching or I'll be left behind. Those layers can't be argued with, but they can be soothed. Each time you sit with discomfort and don't run, the ghost quiets. Each time you meet loneliness without reaching for artificial comfort, the mouth begins to grow. Each time you tell yourself, this ache doesn't need to be fixed, only held, the system begins to heal. Craving loses momentum when awareness becomes more interesting than stimulation. It loses fuel when presence is felt as safety, not absence. It stops controlling when the heart starts trusting again. This is not quick work, but it's real work. It changes how you eat, not because of willpower, but because your body begins to crave differently. It changes how you consume content, not because you delete apps, but because your nervous system no longer panics in silence. It changes how you relate, not because you become aloof, but because you're no longer trying to extract validation from others to prove your worth. This shift is subtle, but over time you feel it in your body. Less tightness, less urgency, less buzzing, more breath, more pause, more grounded choice. You might still use social media, you might still buy things, you might still feel lonely, but the experience no longer owns you. It passes through, like weather, like breath, like any other conditioned pattern. The hungry ghost isn't banished, it's fed the right food, and eventually it stops being a ghost. It becomes part of you again, integrated, whole. This is the beauty of Buddhist teaching. It doesn't shame the craving, it meets it with insight, with gentleness, with truth. And in that meeting, transformation happens. So tonight, as your body softens and your mind releases its grip, let the cravings rise if they want. Don't follow them, don't fight them, just let them float. Let them show themselves without trying to fix or feed them. They're not evidence of failure. They're invitations to stop chasing, to stop proving, to stop running, and simply rest. Because in this moment, nothing is missing. And once the craving has been seen for what it is, not a flaw, not a failure, but a deep call to return to wholeness, something quieter begins to rise beneath it. Not more desire, not more reaching, but a new kind of question. One that's rarely asked when the noise is loud. What truly matters? What deserves attention? What still feels urgent when all distraction falls away? That question can't be answered through more scrolling or grasping. It's answered by something else entirely. By remembering that time is not endless, that every moment is borrowed, that the life being lived is not a rehearsal. And from that memory, a deeper kind of presence emerges. This is where death meditation begins, not as fear, but as freedom. Contemplating death is not about morbidity, it's about clarity. In the Buddhist tradition, death meditation is a core practice, not to scare the mind, but to clean it, to show what is real, to shake off illusion, to bring attention back from fantasy, from regret, from craving, and place it gently on the preciousness of now. The phrase memento mori means, remember you must die, not as a threat, as a truth. And within that truth is a strange, unexpected peace. Because what's often called anxiety is at its root resistance to impermanence, the attempt to control what cannot be held, the attempt to stretch time beyond its nature. But when the mind is reminded, softly, patiently, that nothing stays, the grip loosens, the fear lightens, not because anything outside has changed, but because the illusion of forever no longer holds. When death is seen clearly, life becomes lighter. The unnecessary arguments stop feeling worth it. The inner critic loses volume. The pressure to be perfect starts to fade. Because the one thing that's certain, that every breath is finite, makes everything else fall into place. Not through guilt, through perspective. Sleep meditation is the perfect time to work with this practice, because at night the layers soften, the defenses quiet, the subconscious opens, and the gentle presence of death, when approached without fear, becomes a guide, not a ghost. It starts to rewire the emotional brain, not to obsess over endings, but to release what no longer serves, to make space for what actually matters. There is no need for visualization of decay or dramatic endings, just the felt truth. This breath will pass. This body will pass. These thoughts will pass. Everything will pass. And in that passing, something is revealed, something still, something timeless, something untouched by the rush. This is not nihilism. This is intimacy with life, because only in remembering death do we truly meet life. Only then does the smile matter more than the schedule, the breath more than the checklist, the kindness more than the opinion. In Buddhist monastic practice, monks often chant the 5 remembrances. One of them states, "I am of the nature to die. There is no way to escape death." This is not recited to provoke dread. It's recited to create freedom. When there's no way to escape, the fight to control stops. And when the fight stops, peace enters. Peace isn't found in avoiding death. It's found in not needing to fear it anymore. That fear, which lives quietly in the background of modern life, drains the body. It feeds anxiety. It powers avoidance. But when death is no longer hidden, it loses its sting. It becomes a compass. The subconscious holds many false assumptions, that there will always be more time, that someday everything will be aligned, that discomfort can be endlessly postponed. These assumptions create pressure. They keep the mind on edge. But when death becomes part of daily reflection, even gently, the subconscious begins to reprioritize. It starts to value presence over perfection, gratitude over possession, stillness over busyness. This doesn't lead to passivity. It leads to alignment. You start to act not out of habit, but out of meaning. You stop waiting for the right moment and start living the one you're in. You stop saying later and start saying now. Even relationships begin to shift. The need to win the argument fades. The desire to be right weakens. What rises instead is tenderness, a desire to leave things in peace, a refusal to waste time on resentment, because the clock is always moving, and nothing guarantees another chance to forgive. Death meditation also changes how suffering is held. Because when everything is seen as temporary, even pain becomes manageable. You stop asking, "When will this end?" and begin saying, "This too is passing." That shift turns resistance into presence. It doesn't numb the pain, it softens the fight. Sleep becomes sacred in this context, no longer just recovery, but surrender, a little death each night, a letting go. And when death meditation is introduced during this transition, it teaches the body to rest without clinging, to drift without fear, to lie down not just physically but mentally, to release the day with love, not regret. And in that release, the deepest programming begins to shift, because the mind learns that letting go is not failure, that endings are not punishments, that impermanence is not loss, it's space, and in that space, life returns, fresh, real, unburdened. This is why ancient teachers didn't avoid death. They sat with it. They walked in graveyards. They meditated among ashes, not to dwell in sadness, but to wake up, to shake free from illusion, to remember that each moment is both fleeting and full. The lotus blooms not because it will last forever, but because it doesn't. And when that truth is held, the striving quiets, the craving softens, the fear lifts. You don't stop living, you start. So tonight, as you close your eyes, let the idea of death sit beside you, not as a shadow, but as a friend. A reminder that nothing is promised and everything is precious. Let each breath be a gift you didn't have to earn. Let each heartbeat be enough. Let each thought rise and fall without needing to hold it. There is nothing to chase, nothing to fix, nothing to fear. Just this moment, just this life, just this breath. And now we continue. And once death is no longer hidden, once it's brought close, seen not as something distant, but as the silent context behind every breath, clarity rises. A calm that doesn't come from denial, but from contact. A kind of stillness that begins to rearrange priorities at the root level. Because when the mind fully accepts that nothing is permanent, everything begins to matter differently. Suffering softens, joy deepens, time stretches out, not in duration, but in depth. And from that space, a question begins to form. If death is inevitable, what is it that keeps life spinning in confusion? What keeps the mind trapped in cycles of reaction, longing, and fear? The answer lies in a symbol that has been passed down through Buddhist teachings for centuries: the wheel of becoming. The Bhava Chakra, often called the Wheel of Life, is not just a religious image, it's a psychological map, a mirror of how consciousness functions when it forgets itself, when it moves through automatic loops without awareness. On the surface, the wheel shows 6 realms, traditionally interpreted as literal worlds in which beings are reborn. But deeper teachings point to something far more immediate. Each realm is not a place, but a state of mind. Not somewhere a soul travels after death, but a pattern the mind enters while still alive. This wheel turns every day, every moment. Because the mind, unless trained in presence, spins. It moves through joy and despair, grasping and resistance, peace and torment, without knowing why. The teachings say, look here. See these realms not as myth, but as reflections of your own experience. Once they're seen clearly, they can be exited, not physically, but psychologically. That is liberation. At the top of the wheel sits the realm of the gods, a state of pleasure, comfort, success. This is the mind when everything is going right. The body feels good. The surroundings are easy. There's a sense of lightness. But this realm has a hidden danger: complacency. The God realm creates the illusion that peace is permanent, that this good feeling is deserved and will last. But underneath, a subtle fear begins. Because the mind knows, even if unconsciously, that things change. And the more attached to the comfort, the more painful its eventual loss. In this way, the God realm isn't freedom, it's fragile. Next is the demigod realm. Here, the experience is similar to the gods, still pleasant, but now it's mixed with comparison and competition. The mind feels like it's winning, but always looks over its shoulder. There's tension, a need to protect success, a jealousy of others. This is the realm of ego-based striving. Even victories don't satisfy for long, because underneath the pride is fear of losing status. The psychological grip tightens. Then comes the human realm. This is considered the most balanced, not because it's the happiest, but because it holds both joy and pain. It's the realm where self-awareness can develop, where growth is possible. The human realm is marked by longing, not always craving, but the deeper ache to understand, to connect, to awaken. This realm holds suffering, but also the capacity to reflect on it. This is why so many teachings emphasize human birth as rare and valuable, not because it's easy, but because it offers the tools for transformation. Below that is the animal realm. Here, the mind is ruled by instinct, habit, fear, the need to survive. Comfort and familiarity are prized above reflection. There's no curiosity, only repetition. This is the mental state of sleepwalking through life, doing what's always been done, avoiding what's unfamiliar, reacting without understanding. There's safety here, but no freedom. Deeper still is the realm of the hungry ghosts. Already explored in depth, this realm reflects the mind caught in scarcity, the belief that nothing is ever enough, that fulfillment is always just one step away. This is the mind that keeps reaching through consumption, validation, fantasy, but never feels full. It suffers not because the world withholds, but because the wound of lack shapes perception. And at the bottom is the hell realm. Not eternal damnation, but the state of mind where suffering feels overwhelming and endless. Rage, despair, terror. The mind here is inflamed. It lashes out or collapses. There's no space, no breath. This state often follows trauma, deep betrayal, or prolonged stress. It feels inescapable, but it's not permanent. What all these realms have in common is this: they are not fixed. The mind moves between them rapidly. You can be in the God realm 1 hour and the hell realm the next. You can cycle through all 6 in a single day. This is the wheel turning. Not because life demands it, but because the mind has not yet seen through the illusion of self and story. At the center of the wheel are 3 animals: a pig, a snake, and a bird. These represent the 3 poisons: ignorance, hatred, and craving. Ignorance, the pig, is not stupidity. It's not seeing. The mind fails to recognize its own nature. Hatred, the snake, is resistance, pushing away what feels unpleasant. Craving, the bird, is attachment, grasping at what feels pleasant. These 3 drive the entire wheel. They spin it. They keep the states repeating. But there's a way out. In the corner of every traditional Bhavachakra painting, the Buddha is shown pointing to the moon. The moon represents liberation, enlightenment, the possibility of exiting the wheel entirely, not by destroying the realms, but by no longer being bound by them. And how is that done? Through awareness, through seeing, through training the mind to recognize the state it's in without becoming it. When you feel the grip of jealousy, you name the demigod realm. When you feel the fog of habit, you notice the animal realm. When despair rises, you meet the hell realm with breath. This naming doesn't fix the state, but it removes the unconsciousness. It puts a gap between the feeling and the identification. And that gap is freedom. Eventually, with practice, the mind stops being tossed by the wheel. It still feels, still reacts, but there's space, a witnessing, a knowing that this too will pass, that none of these realms are personal. They are patterns, not prisons. This shift can't be forced. It grows with patience, with sleep meditations that reintroduce the truth gently, that remind the subconscious, you are not the craving, you are not the rage, you are not the despair, you are the space that sees all these things rise and fall, and from that space, choice returns, not control, clarity. Even dreams begin to shift when the wheel is seen clearly. Nightmares may still come, desires may still appear, but the dreamer begins to recognize the pattern, and even in dreams, the wheel loses its grip. Waking life softens too. When the mind no longer believes in permanent identities, winner, loser, victim, hero, it stops taking the ride so seriously. It learns to bow to each moment, not fight it. This is the liberation the wheel points to, not escape from life, but freedom in the middle of it, peace that doesn't require conditions to be perfect. So tonight, let this ancient symbol speak not in myth, but in memory. Let the mind show you where it's been clinging, where it's been spinning, not to shame it, but to understand. Because once you see the wheel clearly, you no longer have to be inside it. You can rest in the stillness that never spins. And now, here you are, still breathing, still listening, but not quite the same. Something inside has shifted, quietly, gently, deep beneath the noise, not because of one moment, but because of all of them. The mind has traveled through samskaras and silence, through karmic echoes and craving ghosts, through death and time, and the wheel that turns when no one is watching. And somewhere in that journey, you remembered what was never lost, your capacity to witness, to soften, to let go. You've explored how suffering doesn't need to be feared, only seen, how identity is not who you are, but what the mind keeps repeating, how even in sleep, even in silence, even in pain, transformation is happening, not because you're forcing it, but because you're finally allowing it. You've met the echo of past imprints, dissolved the illusion of time, sat with death as a teacher, and held craving without being consumed by it. You've learned that liberation isn't loud, it's quiet. It's in the gap between thought and action, between story and presence, between resistance and rest. That's where reprogramming happens, not overnight, not with pressure, but with awareness, practiced again and again until it becomes the new default. Calm instead of chaos, clarity instead of reaction, presence instead of performance. So tonight, as the final words fade, remember this. Your mind isn't broken, it's just been busy. But underneath all that motion is something unshaken, something unconditioned, something still. And you've already touched it. If this journey spoke to something deep inside you, leave a comment below with the words, "I am rewiring." Let's see who made it to the end and who's walking this path of presence alongside us. And if you'd like to keep nourishing this inner shift, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a chance to return to yourself. Now rest easy. You've already begun.